let's talk really quick about Dev's episode 4. Dev's episode 4 review is finished, as you might have seen if you follow me on Twitter. It is done, and all that we are waiting for is for Disney to release it from a copyright hold. Um, it's currently not able to be monetized, and there's always the chance that they'll be like, actually, you got to take this down. Though it is certainly fair use, and I've already appealed it and all that stuff. It is not ready to publish yet, but it will be within the next couple days at most. They have until Friday to, appeal my appeal or however it works. That's YouTube for you. But it is done, and you'll be able to see it soon. In case you can't get enough of our boy Alex Garland. So excited for you guys to see that. Hopefully you will find that it was worth the wait. I think it's pretty funny. So I hope you enjoy it.
I am quite proud of that one myself. So I'm hoping for a good response. And Devs 5 in 7 to 8 years or something like that. Who knows?
Who knows?
Sometime before we die, maybe.
I'm told that I'm a little bit slightly too loud.
I turned you down already.
Okay, maybe that was
there we go.
That was
audio is good now. We are all set.
Okay, cool. Glad to hear it. So, some people in the chat have not seen this movie.
That's okay.
Let's start off. Hugh. Actually, before we get into whether we'd recommend the film and what our overall thoughts, let's talk about our boy Alex Garland. We're something of the internet's leading Alex Garland haters, one could say. But I don't want
that. I don't want to give the impression that we dislike everything that he's done, though, because
that's what I was about to say.
Yeah, I think
let's start with let's start with what we've seen of his. Now, I've seen all of his directorial output, but I have not seen some of his most famous projects that he wrote, which are Dread and 28 Days Later. I have not seen either of those. I did watch half of The Beach, which is a Leonardo DiCaprio movie directed by, I believe, is it Frank Boyle? Is that his name?
Danny Boyle.
Danny Boyle. Anyway, yes, Danny Boyle. And I did not like that. That's based on a novel that Alex Garland wrote, and I did not like it at all. But I haven't seen his most acclaimed written work, that is 28 Days Later and Dread.
I have seen both of those. I love 28 Days Later. I really like that movie. I watched it again this Halloween, and I showed it to my girlfriend for the first time. And you know what? 28 Days Later holds up, okay? There's some stuff about it that's like, maybe it's just a little bit, it's zombie movie. It's got your typical zombie movie stuff. But I like it a lot. I really like 28 Days Later. I think Cillian Murphy, I don't know if that was Cillian Murphy's first film, but it is one of his early career
One of his
movies.
Breakout roles, yeah, for sure.
And he is excellent in that movie. I love him. I love whenever I get a chance to see Brendan Gleeson in a movie, and he was great. It's just a simple little cut and dry zombie film. Dread is also pretty solid. I like Dread a lot. As
it was mentioned in the chat by Topaz, dude, the commonly understood sorry, I don't know why I blanked on saying that. It's a well-known secret that he kind of directed Dread, uncredited director. I've heard a bit about that.
I actually didn't know that, but that surprises me a little bit, because Dread is I enjoy that movie a lot. Well, I guess it doesn't surprise me all that much, because I like Ex Machina too.
Exactly. So, that's what I was hoping we get to next. Ex Machina, his first written and directed film, I still think is really good. I really like Ex Machina.
Yeah.
I think it holds up. There's a lot to be said about how it's directed, the performances, and the writing, especially. Now, that was my introduction to Alex Garland, Ex Machina. And as you might have noticed, if you've seen our review of Annihilation, that was the first... that was what made us start a YouTube channel, was that we saw Annihilation
together. Very hyped up,
my God,
because we both liked Ex Machina, and because I really enjoyed the book of Annihilation. I know, Jamie, you didn't particularly care for the way that it's written.
I don't like the writing style, and so I didn't finish it, but...
Yeah, I really enjoyed that entire Annihilation trilogy, and so I was very excited to see the movie, even though, Natalie Portman can be a real hit or miss for me.
Yeah.
But I really, really enjoyed Ex Machina, was super excited to see Annihilation, and both of us came out of that with our hands on our heads, being like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, Annihilation is a giant mess and a huge disappointment, and I couldn't believe how much he fell off between those two movies. We have a full review of it. It's not very good, though. Everything he's made since Annihilation is even worse. So
it has been a steady decline, even
yes.
exponential, some might say. Because isn't Devs the next project after Annihilation?
Oh, you bet it is. And Devs is one of the worst things I've ever seen. Still to this date, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen.
God,
I hate Devs.
Whenever we do these
so
videos,
much.
the Devs videos, it baffles me how bad. Like, they are just so... The episodes are so difficult to get through. It is a slog. It is mentally exhausting watching all of the mistakes over and over and over again just pile up, and these just long, drawn out, pretentiously boring scenes of nobody doing anything interesting or just telling each other. When I watched the draft of 4, the final of 4, I sent you this the message. I was like, I was worried for a second that because it's been so long between our episodes of 3 and 4 that people might not remember, what's been happening in the show. But every other scene, the characters just tell each other what they did in the last episode, almost as if the show was meant to be watched with years in between each episode. Oh my god.
It's crazy. He has a real tendency towards overly expository dialogue, clunky on the nose dialogue, and that is most egregious, I think, in Annihilation and Devs. We've talked about this before when we were trying to understand exactly what the hell went wrong with Annihilation. There's actually a really good video out there. We've mentioned this before, but it's a lessons from the screenplay video about Ex Machina. And so one of the big things you learn from that is that there were pages and pages of unnecessary dialogue that were cut, either before they filmed, in the process of filming, or in post-production for Ex Machina. And the editor made it much more lean. And I believe that the editor is the reason Ex Machina is any good, because Annihilation and Devs are just full of all of that useless, clunky, awful, on-the-nose dialogue and exposition. It's terrible. Devs is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, and I hate it with just about every fiber of my being. It's kind of a miserable experience.
I think we looked it up too, and we realized that he has not worked with the editor of Ex Machina since Ex Machina, right? Like, they haven't worked together.
No, they haven't. I am convinced that part of the reason for Alex Garland's decline is that he's kind of, all his worst tendencies are just like, no one's reining him in, right? Ex Machina was such a big success that he's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, everything I wanted to do for that. He doesn't seem to have learned any lessons about why Ex Machina worked. That seems glaringly apparent, because after Devs, you have Men, which is just a miserable, like, I hated Men so much. It's terrible. He's really quite remarkable. And, there are plenty of movies that are bad, right? But Alex Garland is kind of like a generational talent in with regards to making bad movies. No one makes them like he does. I don't understand how he does it exactly. He's still a bit of an enigma to me. That's why I'm so fascinated by him, because I'm like, how do you make these decisions? It's crazy. Men really hated that. We have a live stream talking about Men as well. You can go check that out if you're interested.
We have followed his career quite closely, yes.
Yes, we have. Like we said, because Ex Machina, we were all riding high on that. Annihilation looked promising based on the trailers. It was a mess. Then Devs comes out, and like we mentioned in our first Devs review, we're like, okay, well, Annihilation was him poorly adapting someone else's work. This is going to be an original story this time. Maybe it'll be good. No, Devs was awful. Men, I thought maybe there's a chance. This is a very simple horror premise. Maybe he can't fuck it up. Because with Devs, it's about quantum mechanics and multiverses and seeing the future and causality and determinism and all these big ideas. And he fails miserably with regards to all of them. But he thought, Men, there's a creepy guy or guys stalking a woman, so maybe he can't fuck that up. No, he could fuck that up too. So I didn't really have much hope for Civil War, but when I found out that his next movie was going to be a movie that, hold on, let me get the quote. There's a quote when he talked about sort of his intentions behind the movie when he was writing it.
Oh, when he was writing it, I thought you were going to bring up the interview where he.
No. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Save a little bit for that.
In an interview before the movie came out, Alex Garland described the film, that is Civil War, as a companion piece to his 2022 film Men, and said it is, quote, set at an indeterminate point in the future, just far enough ahead for me to add a conceit, and serves as a sci-fi allegory for a currently polarized predicament. Now, I read that, and I was like, oh boy, Alex Garland's going to get political on us.
A companion piece to Men? That was the intention for this movie?
That's what he said. Yes. I don't know how. I don't know how, except for that there's a general cynicism, but we'll talk about it. This movie, he intended to be a sci-fi allegory for a current polarized predicament. Now I thought, oh, we're going to get political. I can't wait to see how bad he fucks that up. And he almost didn't. I don't know how you can make a movie. This is the most remarkable thing about Civil War to me. I don't know how you can make a movie about a second Civil War in the near future, a dystopian American future where the nation's at war with itself, and release it in an election year in our currently, heavily divided political climate. And the movie doesn't even manage to be provocative or controversial. That's something of an impressive feat, I think. I don't know how he pulled it off. Like he really is a generational talent in that, like, I don't know how do you even accomplish that?
He's crazy. He's doing things in ways that nobody could have imagined. Like it's like you're watching, Michael Jordan, and you're like, it's like he came down from another league, right? You're watching Alex Garland movies and being like, there's no way that anybody could have possibly managed to suck this well that way before. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So we've built it up enough. Hugh, what are your general thoughts on Alex Garland's Civil War?
Oh, what? So I told you about this already. I went to see this movie alone in a theater. Had a beer, did not have a great time, and on my drive home, as I began attempting to puzzle it out, just sort of like talk out, explain to myself out loud what happened, what we know about the world, everything that went down, things began to slowly get more and more heated until I was legitimately just screaming into the void as I made my way down the highway. My voice...
As all reasonable, well-adjusted people do, yes.
Because every time I tried to parse something out, some new detail came back to my memory, and I realized how stupid this movie really is. Like, just rooted in stupid. Like you said, unbelievable that he managed to pull off something so, not even just so boring and bland with this kind of subject matter, but that we talked about this briefly, but before I went to see this, we had watched the interview where he, I don't know if I would call it disparages, but he sort of takes a shot at a film most people know, Apocalypse Now.
You might have heard of it, yes.
You might have heard of this. Apocalypse Now. Little indie movie about the Vietnam War. You're from 1980.
Can I set this up?
Yeah,
so,
please.
There is a video. You can find it on YouTube. This is one of those letterboxed interviews where they ask people on the red carpet, people involved with the movie, what their 4 favorite films of all time are. And, it's mostly uninteresting. One of the movies that Alex Garland cites as his favorite movie of all time is a movie that I still haven't seen, but I've heard very good things about. It's a movie called Come and See.
Oh, you haven't seen that?
No, have you?
Yeah, which is one of the yes, it's excellent, and one of the reasons why this movie pissed me off so much, actually.
Yes. Okay, so he cites that as one of his favorite movies. That what he praises it for most is its anti-war. Like, it's one of the best anti-war movies of all time. That's what Alex Garland thinks of Come and See. And he says, some war movies, they think they're anti-war, but they're not really anti-war because they're too stylized. They're too stylized, and they're too they're too seductive, and they romanticize things too much. Like when I was working on this movie, I told he said he told all of the actors that Apocalypse Now was a big inspiration for this. And he said, and I really love Apocalypse Now, but I don't know if it necessarily succeeds as an anti-war film because it's too seductive and romantic.
Yes, because everybody who watches Apocalypse Now,
I want to be just like Martin Sheen. I want to be just
like Martin Sheen or Marlon Brando in that movie. I want to do that.
And so I heard him say that he thinks Apocalypse Now is too essentially stylized and romanticized to be a good anti-war movie, which is insane, right?
It's a fucking crazy claim.
Can we all agree that that's insane? And I heard that and I thought, okay, what Alex is probably going to do with this movie is going to make the movie so bland and boring that it couldn't possibly be like stylish and fun and seductive from his perspective. And that's kind of what he did.
He if that was his intention, he achieved it very, very well. He very much tried to do a Come and See here, right? Because one of the things about Come and See, it's very difficult to watch because of how brutally the characters' experiences are portrayed. It's just, it's just a no holds barred, very well done, well shot movie of people suffering in war, right?
Yeah.
You can see where I'm going with this. He clearly, especially since you've seen it, he clearly wanted to emulate that, but he's not good enough at it. He's not as good. Who directed Come? Who was the famous Russian?
Is it Tarkovsky?
No. It might be Tarkovsky.
I haven't seen it, so I couldn't tell you. That's a big blind spot for me. I haven't seen a lot of those sort of classic, highly critically regarded Russian films.
No, it's Elim Klimov.
Sure.
So yeah, another legendary Soviet director who does a beautiful job of showing the dehumanizing effect of the horrors of war in this portrayal of the conflict. I believe is Belarus. Belarus and oh no, is it just? I think it's just maybe it's just World War II. I think it's World War II.
Whatever you say.
Either way, it's a harrowing portrayal of warfare, and Alex Garland very clearly wanted to ape some of that gravitas, but he's just not very good at executing it.
Yeah, so there's a couple things regarding him trying to make it as bland and not stylish as possible. There are aspects of that definitely come through. So here are some of my thoughts on the movie. The movie is incredibly fucking boring, unbelievably boring, and like empty and hollow and worthless. I really don't like this movie. It's not even so bad it's like anger-inducing for me. It's just kind of baffling. But one of the things that's baffling about it is that everything that seems like the movie is trying to do sometimes, it undermines later. So the style, like the stylistic qualities of it, it's very sort of matter of fact and not especially stylish sometimes. And then there are scenes that are entirely crafted just so he can have a cool visual. And then there are like music choices that have an ironic sort of commentary on what we're seeing. They're too happy or peppy and upbeat based on like for the context of the scene, right? And that's clearly something, that's like a Tarantino thing, right?
Yeah.
To take like an upbeat song and put it over something that isn't fun at all, And so he does some stuff like that, and that kind of totally undermines, I think, what he sometimes seems to be going for, which is like a sort of grounded, brutal realism, no flash, no style, no fun. It's all over the place. The movie's incoherent. I think easily the worst thing about the movie is the world building.
Yes.
What world building there is made up of wet paper towels. It's the flimsiest, thinnest nothing ever. It's very vague as well. The movie tells you very, very little about who the factions really are, what they want. For most scenes in the movie, And this isn't just something I've seen people say like, oh, well, does it really matter if we know why Texas and California are in an
have put
alliance
aside
together?
their differences and have formed an alliance to take on the federal government? Yes, it does. It absolutely does matter.
I agree, but the argument goes something like, oh, they've left that stuff vague because they just want to focus on like characters and plot and tension and stuff like that. The problem with that is, among many other things, uh, half the scenes in the movie where we're in a tense situation where like there's a battle happening essentially, and our photographers are in life and death situations. We don't know who's fighting or why. We don't know who's in what faction. It's just chaos. And there's no reason, like, we don't know what their goals are. We don't even know what faction many of the people are. Jesse Plemons, most famous moment in the trailer, we don't even know what faction he's in. He doesn't appear to be doing anything regarding the Civil War. He's just like a serial killer, essentially. It's baffling. The world building is atrocious, and it does have ripple effects on everything else. In terms of the themes, it's incredibly weak. You've likely seen people question what the point of the movie even is. Like, what does it even have to say? It doesn't have much to say at all. I would describe the theme of the movie as, oh my God, did you know that like war can be brutal?
War is bad, and it drives people a little nutso.
Did you know that like being a war journalist can be harrowing? Oh, you did know that because it's incredibly obvious? Oh, okay. Well, that's what this movie's about. That's the theme. It has nothing to say about, for example, why the country is divided, ideologically or anything of that sort.
It does nothing with this concept is ripe for exploring what a conflict of this magnitude at this
so much
day and age would do to the definition of what it means to be American. And outside of one scene with Jesse Plemons from the trailer that you all know, with What Kind of American Are You, which is much more shallow than any, like, if you haven't seen it, it's much more shallow than you realize. What that scene is yes. Very underwhelming. But it does nothing with the idea of what a conflict of this magnitude would do to the concept of being American, what it means to be an American. Nothing with that whatsoever.
Yeah. It wants to do the that it's all senseless fighting. Oh, here's the real theme of the movie, and it's as bad as it sounds. It literally is, war is bad. That's the message of the movie, and I'm not kidding you. There's even a scene where Kirsten Dunst, our moral center of this movie, says, her character is a famous war photographer, right? She's been there for a lot of key moments in the Civil War, which apparently we find out most of the way through the movie has actually been going on for a long time. How long? Unclear, but long enough for them to have forgotten what a normal what normal American society is supposed to be like. Anyway, so she is a photographer, right? She's very weathered, she's very cynical, she's very kind of closed off, and she she's battle hardened, you might say.
Yeah.
And she says, I always thought when I went abroad to these other conflicts to photograph, war zones and stuff like that, when I sent pictures back, I was sending a warning, right? Don't do this.
God, some of the pictures that they show her having taken, like in those dream sequences too, are insane. The level of violence being committed is so crazy that you have to kind of it's like, okay, yeah, no, that's really nuts. You're not going to do anything more with this insane brutality that you've created for your character than just have her kind of go like, yeah, that's pretty bad, huh? Like, we'll get into it at the end. But it doesn't.
Yeah, getting back to the theme. The theme is that don't do war. Now, that's really, really. I can't believe how shallow and vapid that is. It's crazy. The movie is not really, really concerned with why anyone's fighting or who even people are in most of the fights we see, except for the central climactic conflict. There, we actually learn who the factions are and what their goals are.
Is this opening speech? Are we getting into it? Because I have some thoughts.
Well, I just wanted to say that when it comes to the world building and the themes, it's very vague on purpose and not successfully, I would say. But what is there, there is it's vague, but what is there, there is no possible way of making sense of it, right? They haven't like they've left little clues as to why the Civil War started. But even as vague as it is, there's no way to make sense of them. There's no reasonable interpretation of how we got here, right? There's a number of facts about this movie that are just fucking insane. Speaking of emptiness, most of the movie is just devoid of people. It's like a zombie, it's like a post-apocalyptic zombie movie.
It might as well be 28 Days Later. He's practically recreated 28 Days Later in modern, like with a civil war happening instead of a zombie apocalypse. And much, much more boring. With weaker characters who have...
But the world is that empty. Like, where are all the people? This is a very densely populated country, especially where they are. They're on the East Coast. They're on the East Coast for the whole movie. They go from New York through Pennsylvania to West Virginia to Virginia to DC. All right? Except for West Virginia, a lot of those places still have a lot of people, right? But the movie treats it like, it's a wasteland. There's like nothing out there, essentially, except for the occasional town and some rednecks in charge of a gas station. I want to respond to Mahler, who's in the chat, saying, quote, journalists lose their humanity in the pursuit of something... showing how much humanity is lost in the war. Maybe, except for the fact that they don't really lose their humanity. You know, like, Kristen Dunst saves Kaylee Spaney at the end. And, like, so, like, does she lose her humanity? No. Does Wagner Moura lose his humanity? He actually goes from something of, like, a thrill-seeking... He gets off on all the chaos to someone who's like broken by it. So does he lose his humanity? No, he almost gains it back. If anything, the movie has nothing to say. It's really quite impressive. I guess that's the gist of my thoughts. The movie's bad. I think the movie's bad. Do not believe the reviews. Sorry, can you hear my dog barking? Because he's going crazy right now. Sorry about that.
It's all right. Do not. So the reviews are kind of wild too, and I want to address that a little bit. So most of the positive reviews that you'll find, most of them will acknowledge that all of the flaws and problems that we're going to talk about, most of them acknowledge that they exist. If you go and read them, they're like, the factions are. It's a little bit incomprehensible why anybody's fighting and who's fighting who and what sparked it and everything. But it doesn't matter because the theme is war is bad, and it really does a good job of showing you that war is bad. 8 out of 10. That's basically most of the reviews praising the movie. They all admit the problems, but they'll just be like, but my themes, and move on. That's it. Yeah. So
no, the film and its messaging, I think, are pretty incoherent, and the worst sin any reviewer I've seen make so far is to posit that the lack of world building is actually a good thing in the movie's favor because it's like, we don't care about that. It doesn't matter. It's just about finding yourself in the chaos of war. But the chaos of war doesn't make any sense either in this. Like, they're just driving through these parts and it's like, are there front lines? It's just chaos. Like, society has crumbled almost entirely in some places, but not others. The whole movie takes place in the loyalist states, like, area of the country.
I didn't even
allegedly, but that's just a wasteland also. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense.
You could be forgiven too for wondering whether or not any of the places they visit are loyalist states. Like, they don't tell you what the loyalist faction is, really. They don't explain, and because they don't explain any of it, as far as you're concerned while watching the movie, the federal government, the loyalists, might as well just be Washington, D.C.
Yes.
It might as well just be one city.
Oh, it's so bad. Okay. Let's talk about... I'm going
to keep this screen up for talking about the opening speech given by Nick Offerman, our president.
Yeah.
So I missed the very beginning of the movie. Like, I think maybe the first 30 seconds. So jump in and, give me any, like, I think really all that happens is he, like, stumbles over his words a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
he's practicing it. But before we get in, I want to respond to a couple things in chat.
Yes.
So, is the spectacle high quality like some have claimed? No, it is not. And none of it makes any sense. So even if it's like, oh my God, I can't believe the Lincoln Memorial just got blowed up. It's why are they fighting at the Lincoln Memorial in the first place? It's retarded. It doesn't make any sense. So no, the spectacle is not fun. Some of the CGI is like, it's a little iffy. It doesn't really offer much of anything in the way of like war, spectacle, or action. Most of it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's mostly concerned with, really, all the action scenes are primarily focused on our main character journalist trying to get good shots. And I'm not kidding. It's pretty lame. Always said, for the record, I think the movie is pathetic, but he almost has some things happen that relate to the journalist that are worth talking about in the way of, man, this could have been interesting if he did X. Yes, there's a lot of potential with what he could have done with the journalists, for sure. About like losing their humanity, or even some of the ethics of war journalism itself. Someone said earlier, where is it? Oh, by far the worst message of the movie is that journalists don't make stories. They just take pictures and let people decide. Garland is trolling or naive if he doesn't know what you shoot as a choice. Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. The movie thinks that they're just there to show you the truth of what's happening. Like, they don't have a real say in how the story is being told. They don't make the narratives. They just take pictures of the facts, which is not true at all in real life. You take pictures with an eye for like what the story is. The movie is not concerned even a little bit with the ethics of photojournalism and, war photography. It's not concerned with that at all. It's hardly concerned with the main characters, what they even think about the different factions. We get very little of anything other than, isn't war terrible? Most of the significant payoffs for the main characters are bargain bin versions of payoffs and loads of other better things. Yes, 1000% agree with that. The worst one is the climactic payoff for Kirsten Dunst and Kaylee Spaney. I can't wait to talk about how insanely cliche and awful that was. Let's see. What's crazy to me is people claim the movie is apolitical. There's so many clear real... Yes, so here's the other thing. I think the movie has very little to say, but what it does say isn't exactly apolitical. It's confused and muddled and murky and incoherent, but there is an idea that the current president of the United States is something like a fascist tyrant who refuses to give up power
for a peaceful exchange of power.
He's in his third term. Now
it might even be more than that. We don't know really if he's.
We don't know exactly. But he's in at least his third term. Now, what's not made clear at all is whether he took a third term and then California and Texas seceded, or they seceded and then because a war started, he remained in office for a third term. Both are equally plausible. The movie doesn't tell you which. We know that Nick Offerman's character has used airstrikes on American citizens. So that's bad, obviously. The violence, but here's the thing, the violence on both sides is brutal and definitely not following the Geneva Conventions, right?
Yeah.
It's so incredibly uncivilized that they're just killing prisoners constantly, which is a choice. It feels incredibly unrealistic and
it's crazy stupid. Because even from what I know, and I'm not a historian, but I grew up in Maryland, where the Civil War is a big thing for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are very interested in that history. From what I recall, the actual Civil War didn't have that happen. That wasn't happening left, right, and center like it is in this movie, because there was that idea. Was one of the things that makes that Civil War so interesting for people is that there's this idea that both sides were American and so were being treated as fellow countrymen and not as just random enemy combatants to be slaughtered in mass and dumped into mass graves. There's a sense of tragedy about that. I mean, one of the things that we learn about Antietam growing up in Maryland is that it is the largest loss of American life in the war because everybody on both sides was American. So we count all those numbers, right?
Yeah. But what kind of American are you?
What kind of American? Yeah. Even then, when ideological differences defined by geographical boundaries got to such a boiling point that they began butchering each other on the battlefield, they weren't rolling into every town they could and butchering the civilians.
Yeah.
That was not one.
With regards to that, this movie is very clear in that Nick Offerman, president character, is a bad guy. He's something like a dictator. He's not explicitly like said to be fascist, but that's sort of the implication, right? He refused to give up power. He's been really brutal in his war against the secessionist states. Now, here's the thing. One point is so here are all the states that have seceded in the logic of the movie.
Well, hold on. I want to talk about that because we can.
Okay, well, hold on. I need to make a point because while the movie claims that Nick Offerman's character is really bad, and our main characters don't really, they want to grill him and they want to interview him and they want to grill him on some of the worst sins he's committed, right? And the Western forces are going to go kill him. Our characters don't care to save the president's life. They're fine with him being brutally murdered. So clearly they think he's bad, and our moral center of the story is these characters. They think he's bad, right? Even though they're in the loyalist states that are apparently all still loyal to him. Never mind how that makes any sense. Also, though, meanwhile, the Western forces and all the other militia we see are just as equally brutal. Everyone's just killing everyone indiscriminately, chaotically, and without any real sense of strategy or purpose, right? So the movie...
The idea that he used airstrikes... Keep going.
The movie thinks that he is a terrible person and deserves to go. Meanwhile, everyone is a terrible person.
Yes.
Like, all the factions are brutal. So what even is the point? I have no idea.
Well, and one of the questions, like you pointed out, was that they want to ask him, they want to grill him about his use of airstrikes against American civilians. The only Air Force that we end up seeing in this movie belongs to the Western forces.
Yes.
So the implication there is that they too are launching airstrikes against American citizens. It's just that for some reason theirs are justified.
Yeah, well, I think maybe you could say... Okay, so I don't know if the Western forces are killing civilians. There's a couple people in different factions that are definitely killing civilians, but we don't even know what forces... The Western forces are definitely killing people who surrender. That's something they're definitely doing. They did that several times in the movie, and no one seems to bat an eye, right? So... It's been mentioned by Topaz Dude, it's been mentioned plenty online that a lot of people are interpreting Nick Offerman's character to be a Trump-like guy. There's the fear that he's not going to give up power, whatever. He's very sort of bombastic and self-aggrandizing. You know, this is like the implication being that this is sort of a fear of what would happen if Trump didn't give up power, whatever. That's what some people are interpreting this as. And I can see that kind of.
So I think the main counterpoint to that is that he's only in 2 scenes, and in those 2 scenes he's not particularly bombastic.
He is in the speech he gives.
He is.
He's talking about how, like, or is he... Yes, because what he does is in this first scene when he gives a press conference talking about he basically lies, because we know that this is a lie later in the movie. He lies and says that, they're doing great, and this has been the greatest war offensive in the history of mankind.
That's he does do that. Yeah, that's right.
So he's very self-aggrandizing, and so that aspect feels perhaps a little Trumpian, like the greatest of all time, that whole thing.
It was the greatest military victory perhaps ever in the history of the world.
Yeah, it's that sort of vibe. So there's a little bit of Trump there. I suppose the problem with this being with interpreting this as a direct comparison or like a direct allegory is that no one else seems to be much better.
Well, that and also so if this is a Trump allegory, Texas is fighting to depose him, as is Florida.
Oh yeah. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because if this is Trump we're talking about, a Trump-like figure who refuses to give up power and is killing civilians in this war to keep the United States together and to keep these states from seceding. California seceding, maybe, sure. Texas seceding, probably not. But New York and all these East Coast metropolis-like cities that are everywhere in the Northeast is incredibly blue. You think those people would stay loyal to Trump? Are you fucking kidding me? It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
So let's get into the opening speech. So this is where we sort of get the pretty much all the world building, really, that we're going to get. There's going to be little nuggets of it dropped through the rest of the movie, but this is the big, setting the stage for what is going on. And this is where we find out. So he does lie about the Western forces of Texas and California. That's the first enemy faction that we're introduced to, or one of the two factions. We get the federal government, that's him, and the Western forces of Texas and California. Now, he says they have suffered a major defeat. Enough has already been said about how Texas and California, putting aside their differences to, form a coalition government, is ridiculous at best. But yeah, we'll put that aside for now because I want to get into the other couple factions that are mentioned that are not, like, one of them is not even present on this map. So, in this same speech, we learn about the Florida Alliance. Now, you can see the Florida Alliance on this map, but in the movie, they do not tell you who is part of the Florida Alliance. They just tell you that it exists, and that they have somehow failed to convince North Carolina and South Carolina to join them in their rebellion. Now, the list here is Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee. Those states plus South and North Carolina, that makes perfect sense to me, coming from somebody who lives in rural Virginia now. Okay, South and North Carolina have far more in common with the Florida Alliance states as shown on this map already than they do with the federal government. And
with all of them except for Florida, weirdly enough. Why this coalition of the antebellum South is called the Florida Alliance of all things is insane. Because this is clearly devised by someone who is not familiar with America at all, really. Because Florida, it is South, but it's not in the South. You know what I mean? It's like most of Florida, the Panhandle is very much similar to the rest of the South, but it's such a different world down there. Like no one in Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama would be part of something called the Florida Alliance, for one. But yes, South Carolina, North Carolina, probably even Virginia and Kentucky are more aligned with, the Deep South
Virginia,
than they are with...
absolutely. Like, Virginians love Florida. We go down there all the fucking time. Like that is
everyone in America goes on vacation to Florida, but yes.
Well, unless you're on the West Coast, then you go to California or whatever. But so North Carolina and South Carolina, I'm already struggling to wonder why they have stayed loyal to DC, to the federal government in this situation, if Florida has seceded. But then for them to go and say, they've decided to stay loyal. And we're going to learn in a couple of scenes as they begin their road trip, as our main characters begin their road trip, that the dollar, the American dollar in the loyalist states has collapsed so hard that $300 will only buy you a cheese sandwich at a shitty roadside gas station in Pennsylvania. So Florida, we're in deep shit here. And Florida seems to be, as we'll find out later, because we know that the big military defeat of the Western forces is a lie, air quotes, I'm going to get back to that one. Why would they stay loyal at this point? If everything is going to shit and they're not reading, are they really not reading the signs, reading the writing on the wall? It's already hard enough for me to believe that North and South Carolina don't go along with Florida in this, but then after we find out how bad everything has gotten in the loyalist states, that it wouldn't just be throw in the towel. That's it. We're with Florida again. Cool.
I have no idea, and it's a very good question. Why did South Carolina and North Carolina, why are they aligned with New York, for example, among other things? One note about this map. So this map has been widely circulated online, right? But there's another one, and I thought that they were the exact same, but apparently they're not. The big difference is that the Western Forces section is actually labeled the New People's Army. So that's a different, distinct faction, right?
Which, okay, so the third faction, or the fourth faction, that only gets a very brief mention and plays no role in the story, is mentioned in the car on the road trip. Stewart from Devs, I can't remember that actor's name, but I like that guy a lot. It's unfortunate that he follows Alex Garland around everywhere he goes. He mentions a faction known as the Portland Maoists. So it's not the New New People's Army. That makes more sense in going with the Portland Maoists. It's the Western forces, from what we can tell, are not allied with the Portland Maoists. And I gotta be honest with you here, if Texas and California are together as the Western forces, right, the Union of the West, why would Texas be okay with a country of Maoists living on its northernmost border?
I have no idea. Here's another thing to consider. Why are Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico why have they not been subsumed into whatever coalition Texas and California represent?
It is bizarre to me that those three are shown as being loyalist, because Texas and California don't share a border, and that was one of the first things that I was saying is like, wait a minute. There are 3 states between them. 2 between, the direct border of Texas and California. But like, what's Nevada up to? Like, what's Arizona? What does Arizona have to say about any of this? Or New Mexico? Do they care? Well, like, why is Oklahoma not with Texas and with Florida, apparently? Like,
why are there Maoists and like actual communists in Portland but not in California?
Yeah, there's another great question. I just assumed that the entire West Coast, when he said Portland Maoists, I assumed that meant the entire, like, the West Coast was gone. Like, Washington and Oregon are Maoist now, and California is part of this group with Texas.
Why did they even use the term Maoists instead of communists? You know what I mean? Like, why would, like, it'd be like, oh, the Washingtonian Stalinists? Like, why?
Because Maoism isn't communism, Jamie. It's a different thing.
Okay, so
those are the 3 factions that were introduced to in the movie. The map does not reflect this, and I just want to point out that this is the official material, right? The official promotional material.
This is the green one, at least. The green one that labels the Northwest as the New People's Army. That appears to be official, like from A24. In the movie, I'm looking at the shot from the trailer right now of the map on the television reflected in the mirror. It is not labeled by faction, but California and Texas are blue. All the loyalist states are the exact same, and they're kind of like a light color. And all the other states are like a slightly different shades of dark color. So they're not labeled, but those are the 4 factions. Yes, that's official in the movie. The map is stupid. It's incredibly stupid.
It's very dumb, and so this raises. So I'm gonna just jump a little bit ahead, just a little bit. But when he talks about how the Western forces have suffered a great defeat, the greatest defeat in the history of warfare, the history of defeats. Our main character is introduced in New York, which is basically a fucking war zone for some reason. We'll get into that in a minute. But eventually, Stuart from Devs will explain to us, like, he's full of shit. It's not really a military defeat. It was just a supply line destruction. And I just want to point out that even without the map looking this way, right, without these being the loyalist states, that is a 2,600-mile supply line. We're going to find out soon that the Western forces are in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's their front line, right? They have conquered all the way from Texas and California. Who knows what the borders of sovereignty look like between them and the Florida Alliance.
Well, here's a good question, Hugh. If the map in the movie is like the current map, why would it be labeled like this if the Western forces are all the way into Virginia from Texas and California? Why would it even be labeled like this? Wouldn't it be labeled that all the loyalist states all the way in the Midwest to Virginia
have fallen? Wouldn't that be? Yeah. Especially if, as we're about to learn, DC is on the brink of falling. Because the Western forces are mounted in Charlottesville, Virginia, which, if you don't know Virginia, Charlottesville is still 120 miles to the south of D.C., and there's a river that you have to get over, that, if there was a potential invasion, they would blow those bridges. 100% they're going to fortify the bank of the Potomac. So, you're not getting into that city without a significant fight.
Not with tanks.
Not with tanks. Yeah, without a significant fight. And you're not really on the brink of taking DC if you're 120 miles south, and your 2,600-mile supply line just got destroyed. That's the kind of supply line problem that killed the Japanese in China, or that killed Napoleon in Russia, minus the winter. The winter was bigger, but the supply line problem, that's stretch of supply line. If you can't maintain that supply line, the forces in Charlottesville are done. They're toast. They are all they have is what they brought with them. And all of those loyalist states is hostile territory. They are deep in the shit with nothing, because their supply line is gone. So,
but simultaneously, they're on the verge of victory because basically all the other generals for the loyalists have just given up.
Yeah, so, for some reason, yeah.
It's incoherent. Before we continue, I want to respond to a super chat we got. Thank you very much, Metal Face Rosie, for asking if Civil War by Guns N' Roses played at any point. No. A quick note about the music. I don't think I've ever actually experienced this before. Maybe since the 2016 Suicide Squad movie. Every piece of music in this movie is wholly inappropriate. It's almost insane how consistently bad every song choice is. Every time a piece of original, I don't know if there's some score, but didn't really stand out. The soundtrack in particular is inappropriate every time it comes in. I couldn't believe it. It undermines every scene. It's wild. I don't know if you felt the same way, but I thought all the music choices were terrible.
Yeah, they didn't do anything for me.
Yeah, he has really bad taste in music, at least from this movie. Crazy. Any reason why no other country has invaded the U.S.? None given. No.
Nope. They can't even distinguish, do a good job of explaining the politics of the U.S. fighting the U.S. There's no way that he would have tried to jump in on that. The only
thing even remotely approaching an international ramifications of this whole conflict is that Canada's dollar seems to be doing pretty well.
So the 300 Canadian is so much money that they managed to convince some people to give them gas for it instead of for American dollars.
Yeah.
If you have Canadian money, you can get pretty much anything you want, basically, is what
Canadian money is doing just fine. Meanwhile, American currency has imploded. There's no discussion of whether, any of the other factions have their own currency or anything like that. None of that's mentioned. We get nothing of an international sort of ramifications of any of this. The map and the world building is awful.
And it's going to be worse in a little bit, because we're going to find out that two characters, the two big ones, Kaylee Spaney and Kirsten Dunst, have family in the Midwest, right? Kirsten Dunst's family is on a farm in Colorado, a loyalist state according to the map, and Kaylee Spaney's is in Missouri on a farm, another loyalist state. And each time they are mentioned, the two characters both say, "Oh, they're just hanging out on their farm pretending like none of this is happening." The collapse of the American dollar to the point that 300 of them will only buy you a cheese sandwich at a gas station. And these people who are on farms in Missouri and Colorado, which earn have to take so much money from federal subsidies just to stay afloat, they're not feeling that at all. With DC about to collapse, really, they're not feeling it at all. They can just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yes, that's insane. The only thing I would say is there's a good chance that, ignoring this stupid map, because the map is stupid, are those states all in the control of the Western forces by this point?
Who knows? We don't know. How would we know?
We don't know.
We don't even know that Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Tennessee are part of the Florida Alliance. This makes it even more difficult to imagine how, do they have a deal with the Florida Alliance where they can just walk through Oklahoma? Or through, because otherwise you have to go up and around New Mexico to avoid an international incident.
Yeah. That's funny.
Are they allied together? Are the Western forces in Florida Alliance together? They don't seem to be, because they never show up on the same battlefield. We don't get the Florida Alliance is so irrelevant in this movie that even when one of the main characters reveals that he is from Florida, it does not make a difference to how anybody treats him.
No, not at all. because that character only cares about whether you're American or not. He's not even really involved in the conflict between these different warring factions. It's crazy. And it does get worse. The more we get into it, it does get worse. Oh, here's the other thing I wanted to mention briefly. The point where it comes up that Kaylee Spaney's character's parents and Kirsten Dunst's character's parents are just pretending like the war isn't happening. There's another town that they arrive at. I believe it's in West Virginia.
No, it's I think it's outside of. It's because they drive past a bridge that says "Go Steelers." So it's outside of Pittsburgh, I think.
Okay, it's still in Pennsylvania. This is a small town where it appears that the Civil War isn't even happening. Everything seems to be going roughly as normal. There's still a town. There's people out walking their dogs and watering their grass in the suburbs, all that sort of stuff. And the movie presents all three of these moments as if it's crazy. It's disparaging of the people who are just trying to get on with their lives and pretend like this isn't happening. The movie is disparaging about those people.
Never mind how they could even possibly be doing that if their currency has collapsed.
Never mind that. Ignoring that, like, wouldn't you expect random civilians to still be trying to, like, have businesses and live their lives if they're not, like, in the army? Like, why is this? It's presented like it's a bad thing. Our characters kind of make fun of the people who are just trying to pretend like the Civil War doesn't exist. But our main characters also don't really have an opinion on any of the factions. So it's like they're not even invested in one side winning over the other. They're just there to report the facts. But meanwhile, they'll disparage people who are just trying to live normal lives. Like, what is that? Like, what are you trying to say, Alex? I don't understand this at all.
I don't get it. Yeah. And then they have that whole scene at the end when they leave. So they come into a clothing boutique, right? Where they've got, this is a business where somebody is paying a woman to sit at a desk in case people come in to go shopping. Again, American dollar is worthless. So, why are they, what are they like even really doing here? Right. But they're, and you mentioned the thing about them using sprinklers. They're using sprinklers, like electric sprinklers to water their lawns and everything like that. And New York, when we're introduced to New York might as well be Palestine. Like, there are riots in the street, people begging for clean drinking water, and then some hippie terrorist, like, it happened so quick that I think I looked down at my beer and missed what happens, but, like, a bomb just flies in out of left field, TKO out of nowhere, and blows up the fucking tanker of clean drinking water, along with a bunch of people with babies. There were women holding babies in this line,
so civilians are killed, and the SWAT team trying to prevent the rioters from taking over whatever, they get killed as well. I have no idea why that happened. This is one of many scenes where we're not told who the factions are here, who's who, what they want, what is even happening. We're just thrown into chaos and meant to go, oh man, isn't chaos terrible? If you look it up, I believe it's on the Civil War Wikipedia page in terms of the plot. It says
somehow Civil War returned. Is that what?
Hold on. A veteran war photographer, Lee Smith, along with her journalist colleague Joel, are caught up in a suicide bombing as they attempt to cover growing civil disorder in New York City.
That's a suicide bombing?
Apparently, it happens. A bomb goes off and kills a bunch of people. They don't tell you why. I don't think there's anything in the movie itself to justify the interpretation that was a suicide bombing.
Yeah, I could have sworn it looked like a backpack just flew through the air. Or like, honestly, I thought it might have even been an airstrike. And I was like, who's New York fighting for? I was very confused as to, like, is New York loyal to the federal government? Like, this is the commerce center of the country. Like, this is a problem if you're giant financial center. And, like, I mean, it used to be a big industrial thing. I don't think it is anymore. But, like, this is one of the most important pieces of your economy, and people can't get clean drinking water. Let's just never mind the fact that this is the future, right? This is the near future, and there is a bunch of water all around them that they could desalinate or, like, catch rain. It's not like it doesn't rain in New York, Like, you can do things to get clean drinking water in New York. You're not living in fucking Los Angeles. So
the implication is that everywhere in the Loyalist states, because that's all we ever go to in the movie. We're in, like I said, we're in New York City, then Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh, down through West Virginia, to Virginia, and then up to DC, right? We're in the Loyalist states the whole time. It's just a wasteland. So like, here's the thing. If New York has collapsed to that degree where people just can't get drinking water, like why are they still loyal to, to
It's
DC?
the same question as like why North Carolina and South Carolina didn't just go like, you know what, maybe Florida's got a point. We've always been closer to them anyway. Like why? Why
All the New York Jews that winter in Florida, like they probably have more. They probably go down to Florida. I would. Hell yeah.
Why?
Okay, so someone said, Filthy Casual says, it is a common talking point of it isn't enough to be neutral, you have to be anti, as in like you can't just not be racist, you have to be anti-racist. That does, I think, partly explain the sort of disparaging attitude we take to people who are just trying to live their lives and not get involved. Never mind how that would even be possible. The movie kind of shits on those people, but at the same time, our main characters aren't anti anything, really. They seem to be anti the president, even though they're in New York, which is a loyalist state. Why New York was even loyalist to begin with, who fucking knows? But they seem to not like him, and they seem to basically ignore all the atrocities committed by other militias, who I don't even know who they're a part of. They might just be rogue. They seem like, some of them, they just kind of like, they don't seem to be rooting for any particular side at all. They're just there to document atrocities.
Well, and there's a Mad Max vibe to it too, right? Because when they pull through that Pennsylvania gas station to refill, there's a bunch of rednecks in trucker hats and military vests, and they go around the corner and they find that they've hung two looters who were trying to get gas for some reason, right? They've got them strung up and they're torturing them, right? Like they're beating them senseless
because they were looters, yeah.
Because they were looters. And one of them, one of the guys is like, "Oh, I went to high school with him. I knew him in high school. So, he was never very nice to me," kind of thing. And it's like implying obviously that like somebody took advantage, like these people are taking advantage of the situation to be cruel and let their cruelty out, right? But like, why is my question.
Yeah, most of the... Okay, so here's the thing. We go through a sort of tour because here's the basic premise, right? Well, sorry, we have the premise. Here's the basic plot. Kirsten Dunst and her partner... Okay, so I have this up so I can remember names because usually I'm so bad at names.
I'll switch to the trailer now. I've ranted about the map enough.
Yes, so Lee Smith is Kirsten Dunst. She is a seasoned battle-hardened war photographer, and her journalist colleague Joel, who is played by Warner Mora, I don't know how to say his name. They want to go down to DC because they want to try and get an interview with the president. Now, Stuart from Devs, whose name in the movie is Sammy.
Sammy, that's it. Yeah, that's it. We all loved Sammy. We all love Sammy.
Okay. A brief note about how a couple of the characters have like moments of charm, and it's almost entirely the actor's performance and not the material itself. I really like Kaylee Spaney, who plays the young war photographer. I think she's really good. I've also happened to work with her, and I know she's a really nice person. I really want her to be successful because I think she's a really talented actress. She keeps getting these roles that like aren't quite breakout roles because either the movie kind of sucks or they're kind of niche. She's going to be in that new Alien movie, which I hope, especially for her sake, is good because I think she's a talented actress and a nice person. I have no idea if that new Alien movie is going to be any good, but she is good in this despite the bad material. I would say that Kirsten Dunst is not especially good in this. I find her character, especially and the way she performs her, very unlikable. She's very miserable and cynical, and
she's
not
our
especially
classic
compelling.
Alex Garland female protagonist who's very rude and standoffish and mean to people for no real reason.
He always does this. He has a real problem with female characters in that they're all so unlikable. Kaylee Spaney seems to manage to avoid this. I don't know how she manages to avoid it, but she does. And then
she played a boy in Devs, so
well, that is true. She did avoid it in Devs. She played the kid. Yeah, when I met her, she was like, "Oh, what'd you think of Devs?" And so I was nice and didn't say that I hated the show with every fiber of my being. I said, "Oh, I thought you were really good at it." I had no idea until I looked it up afterwards that like you were a woman. So that was fun. And she was like, "Oh, thanks." Anyway, I didn't tell her that I hated I because I had to work
It
with her.
didn't direct her to our channel. It's like, well, if you
No,
really
I
want to
didn't say.
know, there's like four
Yeah,
hours, or at the time, there's like 3.5 hours that you can just go and watch of us shitting on this project for it. Yeah.
yeah. I didn't tell her that. I told her, "Oh, I really like Ex Machina," and she was like, "Oh, I liked Annihilation too." And I went, "Uh-huh."
Yep.
Um, anyway, I like her in this movie. I like the guy who plays Sammy. I always forget his name. He's also in Dune. He's also in Devs. He's also in Beau is Afraid, actually. He's a good actor. And so they both bring a little bit of life to characters that don't really have much to work with. So,
Yeah.
good for them. Anyway,
Kirsten Dunst's
they,
performance in this one reminded me very much of Natalie Portman's in Annihilation, where it's just like it's very
I agree.
bland. It's very like it's also a little bit so I was a little bit impressed with Kirsten Dunst in this, mostly because I had just rewatched some Devs, and it's very it's very similar to the way that Lily Chan is portrayed in Devs.
Yeah.
And it just kind of gave me a little bit more respect for both Natalie Portman, I think, and for Kirsten Dunst, because I was like, well, she's not doing great, but she's being given essentially the same material as whoever played Lily in Devs, and
Yeah,
she's not that bad. She's not as bad as Lily,
that's
so
true.
at the very least, you can see some talent there. But the material is just there's just nothing to work with, man. Like it's just a
There's very little
milquetoast
to work with.
character.
She doesn't really even especially have a character arc necessarily. She's basically static for most of it. Anyway, back to the plot, which I would like to set the basic plot. They want to get to DC to interview the president. Now, Sammy, a fellow reporter who works for a different outlet, the guy who played Stewart in Devs, he says, "What are you crazy? You can't get an interview with him. He doesn't do interviews anymore," which is more sort of like
It's even worse than that.
echoing sort of.
He says they shoot journalists on
Oh,
site
right.
in Washington D.C.
That's crazy. Like they don't even have their own journalists. Anyway, it's dumb. So he's clearly
Sports
like a
writer for the
fascist.
Capitals is like, what the fuck did I do?
Yeah, so he's clearly like a dictator type figure, right? So they shoot journalists on site, which means he's very evil, of course, obviously. But they want to try to get an interview with him anyway because it's such a good story. Now,
Well, it's also because they believe that DC is on the verge of collapse. And
yeah,
so they want to get to DC and take his picture and interview him before
this is the last good story left. Yeah,
before the Civil War ends. Basically, they're like, yes.
They don't really care who wins. It seems honestly they don't seem to like the president, but they don't seem to really be invested in who wins and what faction does what and whether countries like when the Western forces kill the president and take over, are they going to remain seceded in different factions? Are they going to try to bring everything back together again? None of that is ever even discussed. But our main characters don't care about that anyway. They just want to get the good story because it's the last good story to get, and they're journalists, right? So Sammy's like, "Oh, well, I'm trying to get down to the front lines in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the Western forces, they're moving towards DC. They think they're going to get there by July 4th. Oh my God, July 4th. What a crazy symbolic coincidence. Brilliant stuff, Alex. Thanks." They're trying to get down to DC, but they say the highway 95 is what you would take from New York to
95
DC.
is super backed up.
Well, I mean, what else is new? But like apparently 95, like the way to get to DC, like you can't even get to DC like by a straight shot from New York. They have to go all the way west out to like Pittsburgh, which is in western Pennsylvania, and then go down and around. They have to do this weird like fishhook motion to get all the way to DC, which is crazy. Like how has the loyalist faction degraded such that you can't even get from one part of it to the other anymore?
He
Like what?
he also says you don't want to get anywhere near Philadelphia, as it like implying that Philadelphia is even more of a shithole than New York at the. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense, but
I actually just love the implication that like nothing especially bad is even happening in Philly. He just doesn't like it. You don't want to go anywhere near Philly. Trust me,
you
the
don't want to go
traffic
anywhere
flow
near
is
Philly.
terrible.
The Eagles are having
So,
too good of a season. We don't want to do this.
so never mind the how. They have to go all the way around, and before they leave. In the initial sort of like cold open scene where they're reporting on general unrest with no discernible rhyme or reason, there's a young photographer who gets smacked with like the butt end of a rifle or a baton or something like that by one of the SWAT people. That is Kaylee Spaney's character. She is a young, aspiring photojournalist. Oh man, and she totally looks up to Kirsten Dunst's character, and she wants to be just like her when she grows up. Please, can I come with you guys to DC? And the other guys are like, sure, you can come, but Kirsten Dunst is like, no, I see too much of you in me, and I don't want you to go through all the same things I did because you're too young and you're a kid.
I love the
It's
part
like,
where she like she sneaks into the Kaylee Spaney sneaks into the back of the SUV that they're gonna be driving, this hatchback SUV. They've got the back door wide fucking open. Kaylee Spaney's sitting in there with everybody. Kirsten Dunst pulls the her partner aside, who's gonna be driving, and like without closing the door, just starts like he's like, "Hey, can I have a word?" Like she's gonna start talking to him secretly. Leaves the door wide open so that everybody in the car can hear exactly what she's saying, and walks to like over to the side and goes, "What the fuck is she doing here? I don't want her to be coming with us. This is a stupid
and they can
idea."
hear everything.
They can hear everything. Why did you even do this in private if you weren't going to close the door? Like,
I have no idea. I have no idea. It's really silly. But the subtext is obvious. It's even just text at some point that, you know, oh, she's like a younger version. Oh, actually, it's mostly not subtext. It's all just text.
Were you so different?
Yeah, it's all all that sort of stuff. Like Kaylee Spaney is a younger version of Kirsten Dunst, and Kirsten Dunst has been through hell and back, and she's kind of like cynical and jaded and hardened and kind of ruthless. You know, like don't get emotionally involved in any of this. You know, all that sort of stuff. And there's this young kid who wants to be just like her, and she's like, "No, war is hell, man, and I don't want you to get involved. You're staying home." But they convince her to come anyway. And then much of the movie is just having those kind of conversations without saying anything interesting.
When it's like, and I just want to point out too, because like the Kirsten Dunst thing about that, like, you know, oh, I don't want you to get war is hell. I don't want you to get involved, is in direct opposition to what she tells Kaylee Spaney in the first scene that they meet, you know, like not after the first scene where they actually talk in the hotel with all the other journos who are partying for some reason, right? After that bombing that went down, you know, oh boy, we got the shot.
Yeah, exactly.
She tells her, is like, hey, you know, if you're going to do this, you better hold on to that fluorescent vest I gave you. And you should get yourself some Kevlar and a helmet. Like she's giving her tips on how to become a war photographer. Next time. Better have that stuff next time. And then she goes to become a war photographer with them, and she goes, yeah, no, I don't want you. No, you shouldn't get involved. War is hell.
Yes, and she also only has that attitude for a bit, because then she's going back to giving her tips again.
Yeah.
Like, it's incoherent. So that's why, like, I've seen people say, yeah, the premise and the world building kind of suck. You just got to accept that Texas and California are allied with each other because this is an alternate world, whatever. The plot and the character stuff is good. I'm like, no, it isn't. Okay, at best, the character stuff is just a lame version of things you've seen much better in other movies. Right down to the final sort of climactic character moment is the most cliche thing you've ever seen in your life. It's wild. I couldn't believe it. So anyway, they're going on a tour through America, and it's just like a zombie wasteland. Most of the time they're driving through, like even when they're driving through what should be small towns where there's like a shopping mall or whatever, it's just a ghost town.
If you've seen 28 Days Later, it's that. They're the whole thing with 28 Days Later, they are driving. They're driving through hostile territory, and they're just kind of like, it's a little bit like a proto Walking Dead, better executed. But like they're driving through these places and just seeing what the collapse of the chaos that the collapse of society has wreaked on the places, right? And then getting into these tough little adventures, like we can go into this shopping mall or this grocery store that hasn't been looted yet, and we can get all our stuff, and we're all happy. Isn't it so great? We've got everything that we can eat that we don't need to microwave. You know, yay! Wow! Oh, we don't have to cook it. Hooray! We've got food. Oh, but now we're sad because we've driven past somewhere where there was a family and a kid, and like the kid was a zombie and we had to kill him, and then but now we're happy again because we found little bits of, like, there's a place with flowers where we can camp. Like it's very much like that, but not as good, not as well executed, and with crappier world building to boot. Because
a civil war wouldn't create a zombie apocalypse. Like the whole country seems almost entirely empty. For the most part. Like, even when they get to DC, there's hardly anyone in DC. We get overhead shots of the city, and there's like no one on the roads anywhere. It's just, this place is bizarrely empty, almost like millions, like hundreds of millions of people have died.
It's almost a set. It's almost like it's a set.
Yeah, well, of course. And
that's why I wasn't like a huge, because there are so many people living in DC, and I know a lot of people who live in DC, and I visit DC frequently. I was just there yesterday after this movie, celebrating the fact that nobody is mortaring the Lincoln Memorial, and that Alex Garland can't tell me what it means to be American, so he didn't even try. Like,
yeah. So, okay. The place is like a wasteland, right? And they're driving through, and we have a number of different encounters with the sort of horrors and chaos of war along the way. Most of them just unrelated. It's just a weird, lame odyssey, essentially. One of the first ones is that they're driving, like, we should probably stop for, this gas station looks open. We should probably stop for gas because we might not have another opportunity for a while. And so they stop at this gas station. This appears to be in rural Pennsylvania, somewhere between New York and Pittsburgh. And there are just guys with guns outside of it. They arrive. This is the scene we've alluded to already, where they're like, hey, we just want to get some gas. And they're like, we'll give you $300 for gas. Because initially they're like, oh, you need a permit to get gas. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's a thing that happens. And so, like, okay, what if we give you $300 for the gas?
Yeah, this is where we get, $300, that gets you a sandwich. We've got ham or cheese.
And it's like, this seems to surprise our main characters. It's like how much the dollar has collapsed. And it's like, how is this a surprise to them?
First they lived in New York.
They're living in another loyalist state. Whatever. Doesn't matter. The dollar has collapsed. Maybe they're just fleecing them for money, except they say, what about 300 Canadian? And the guy goes, ooh, 300 Canadian? Hell yeah. So they're not just lying to them. You know what I mean? You're like, the logic of the story is that the dollar has collapsed incredibly. But for some reason, this is a surprise to our main journalist characters.
One of whom writes for is a journalist. We don't know what he does really. Sammy, I don't know what Sammy.
He's a journalist. He writes things. He doesn't have a camera.
Yeah,
he's just
so one of them writes for the New York Times, and he doesn't. Whatever's left of the New York Times, air quotes, which of course also raises some questions about who they're taking these photos for. They're international news outlets as well, but like they're running around doing all this journalism. But they even mention that one of the biggest journalistic publications has basically also collapsed. So like why are they doing all of this? Just because.
I don't know.
Just because it's their job.
That's their job, to just report on what's happening. So the movie's logic, and this is said multiple times by characters in different ways, that what the journalists are here to do is just report on what's happening so other people can make up their minds. And it's like, that's not how this works. All right, this is naive, Alex Garland. War journalists have perspectives. All right, you think just imagine any war journalist going into like Israel and Palestine right now. You think any of them are like not coming at it with a story? You know what I mean? Like there's both sides of the story. Anyway, I want to respond really quick to Paradox in the chat because I think he said something very good and insightful regarding themes, right? And the themes of this story. So zombie apocalypses are metaphors for nihilist moral landscape. I guess Civil War imagines that's what war is like, but war actually tends to bring people together. Like war isn't a battle between two different philosophies, not a wasteland with no philosophy. And that, I think, is absolutely true.
Yes.
I agree with that this is not the setting to treat like a zombie apocalypse. This is a civil war with like two main warring factions that represent two different clashing and competing perspectives that presumably can't be
they can't be reconciled with diplomacy. Like it had like the Civil War that happened in the United States of America. Yeah. There was a very severe disconnect between like a one issue in particular that the hump couldn't be gotten over, and things were boiling over on the diplomatic side. Like they were fighting in Congress. the members of the slave states were fighting in Congress with the members of the abolitionist states, right?
Yeah, you can't. That doesn't map on to like a zombie movie, which is like kind of like the absence and death of meaning entirely, right?
You have to
imagine making a movie about the actual American Civil War and treating it like war is hell. Am I right? War is so meaningless and pointless, and it's like no, there's actually a pretty big point in that one, and it actually mattered quite a bit.
Exactly. Well, or like kind of the same as like trying to do a like a World War II on the Western Front movie like this, right? Where you have like there's a pretty big point to be made in that, in that one on the Western Front. At least on the Eastern Front it gets a little murkier. That's probably why Come and See has that sort of vibe to it, where because like on the Eastern Front it's more of like bad guys versus worse guys, there's a big difference. But like one of the main things about the Civil War in America is that like you can't start it without significant support, and you can't maintain it without significant support. This is another thing that kind of annoyed me when while they're on the road, Sammy mentioned something about the president going for a third term, and I was thinking to myself, because I've been reading about this a little bit lately. FDR, I'm pretty sure, was the first person since George Washington to try for a third term. Because George Washington did not, he stopped at 2 and went, no, because he was offered the third one and said, no, I'm done. And there was no rule against it. It's just that everybody, after their 2 terms, was like, it's unseemly to do that. That's a couple hundred years almost between when, between that. And nobody went to try it unless, of course, they were in war. FDR was in the middle of a wartime. He was a wartime president. He was in the middle of a war. You have to have some significant support and some serious good reason to defy convention like that. And that was just convention. Now it's illegal. Like now it's written into the Constitution that you can't do it. You would have had to have some serious support to keep all those states on the map loyal to you after trying to pull that shit.
And how did he pull that off with New York, Hugh?
How did he pull that off with New York? How did he, while New York is now in the middle of a fucking water shortage crisis, and they have suicide bombers running around blowing up babies, but they're still loyal enough that they have.
The implication, this has been going on for years, all right? And here's the other thing. So how did this war even start? Let's say what really started it was like, oh, the guy like refuses to give up power. Let's just assume that interpretation because it seems the most straightforward, even though there are plenty that you could take from this mess. So Texas and California, as well as Florida and most of the antebellum South, and also most of the like northwest of the United States are all like, nah, we're not part of this anymore. We're seceding. And one assumes that the war, like the actual fighting, is started by the president and the loyalist states trying to keep the country together, right? Because like, I mean, that's what happened in the actual Civil War. Like the South is just like, nah, we're gone. We're not a part of this anymore. And the North was like hell, you're not. We're gonna come fight you over it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the South didn't. You know what I mean? So like, clearly, the implication you would think is that the loyalists are the only ones who like really wanted a war, unless the other states that seceded like started the conflict in order to try and depose the president. Like, I don't know which it is. It should matter. It should really matter to the story, but I have no idea what they actually think.
Well, because otherwise all we're doing is watching a bunch of chaotic scenes play out, but we don't understand why we should care about any of it, apart from
fighting. What are the goals? Like, does California and Texas and the Florida Alliance, like, do they just want to be left alone? Or are they like fighting a war of aggression to try and depose what?
I mean, if they want to, I think it's pretty clear that they're fighting a war of aggression to depose a government, because otherwise they wouldn't be in Charlottesville; they'd be in California and fucking Texas. Like,
well, okay, but if they initially seceded, just to be like, we want to be left alone, and then what's his name, the president of the Loyalists, started a war of aggression first to try and to keep them as part of the United States. in order to win the war, they would probably have to get to Washington and depose him anyway, right? But like, I still don't know if the goal of any of these secessionist parties is to bring the U.S. back together once the evil guy has been removed, or if they want to permanently be their own separate factions. I have no idea.
You know what? That's a great point. Who knows?
Who knows?
California and Texas have created their own version of the American flag that only has 2 stars. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty big statement to be like, yeah, no, we're on our own. It's also like clearly ignoring the fact that like in order to make that work, they clearly need Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico, or at least Arizona and New Mexico. But those 2 or those 3 don't seem to, they don't want anything to do with it. Yeah, they are loyalist to the core, or they're just,
or they've been captured and they're already part of that republic.
They've just been
Who cares?
Subsumed against their will. Like who?
Alex Garland doesn't care, and neither do any of our main characters. So in none of the scenes, except for the climactic scene, do we even tend to know who anyone even is. So these people that run this gas station that they come up to, we find out that the people, they looters that they've hung up and they're being cruel to them and they're torturing them and all that sort of stuff. And we take pictures of them. What faction are they with? Who knows? When we eventually get to Jesse Plemons' character, he's in uniform, and they're piling the dead bodies of what people who look like civilians and that the movie treats like civilians into a mass grave and pouring lye all over them. What faction is he with? Who knows? He doesn't even appear to be doing any work for either side. He just seems to be killing people indiscriminately if they're not American. So many of the little incidents of violence and the horrors we see along the way don't even have to do with the Civil War. And some of them, it's like, oh, there's people who aren't in uniforms, but they are wearing Kevlar vests and have guns. They're shooting at people in uniforms, and our war photographers are with the sort of militia of people without uniforms. What are they even trying to do? Are they trying to, like, capture a building? Why? I don't know. We eventually capture some soldiers. We don't even hear from them, and then they're executed.
They execute them. Oh, my God. Dude, yeah, when they capture these soldiers who have like surrendered, right? Like these soldiers have surrendered because they're being led out in handcuffs. They are not dead. They are prisoners.
Yeah, they just execute prisoners.
And they put bags over their heads, execute them, and then mutilate the corpses with railguns, wasting their own ammunition.
Yeah, because no reason. These people aren't realistic. They're just brutal. And so here's the other thing. Like, who are those militia? They're clearly not part of the evil loyalist faction who's led by a dictatorial president. They're just evil as well. Everyone just appears to be evil, except for our journalists who are neutral and don't really care either way. This is insane. This is absurdity. This is like...
And as far as we know, those people who they executed, those soldiers who they executed, were their neighbors.
Yeah. Because he really wants to do the, like, a brother against brother thing, but also simultaneously, he seems to want the movie to be like, society has collapsed completely, and everyone's just eating each other. Like, that's what the movie really tries to be. But it's so bad. I hate it. It's really, really bad. So, okay, we've seen the hicks with guns who run the gas station, who
torturing a guy who one of them went to high school with, like, which
for looting, apparently
implying that high school, because this guy's not all that old, right? He looks like maybe late 30s or mid 40s, right? Like with the gun, so implying that this war is not like super old. They went to high school. It hadn't been going on for decades, so like,
the movie kind of plays it both ways.
It does a little bit, yeah.
They talk about like it has to have been at least years for everything to get this bad, right? It has to have been years, but not so long that guy wouldn't have been in high school before this all happened. There's so many things they kind of they play it both ways. They play it like this has been going on so long they've totally forgotten what normal life is like. So who fucking knows?
The ones who live in New York, and are taking pictures, and like they've been going up and down the coast, I'm sure. That's like because they're taking getting all the pictures and everything like that. And she's been to a bunch of other countries and other war zones where like oh god, what did you make of that scene where she dreams about that time she took a picture of a bunch of people
burning a guy to death?
Yeah, like putting a guy in a tire right, so that he can't move his arms, covering him in kerosene and then lighting him on fire. And she just stood there and took a picture of it. What did you make of that? And what that does to her character?
Well, she did nothing to try and stop it, but then also maybe she would have been killed if she did. So probable, whatever.
But yeah.
Probable. But so I guess she doesn't like care enough to risk her own life to try and save someone. You could make the argument that like there's no way she could have done anything to help in that situation. But you could also make the argument that like she's just so cynical and jaded that she did nothing about it. But that's not any part of her character arc, really.
No. You know, and it's an insanely violent thing, an insanely cruel thing to put in this movie with no context.
Exactly. I want to say briefly, Topaz makes a good point. Why does anyone in this world surrender if we all know what happens? Yes, every time anyone surrenders or is captured, they're just killed by both factions, regardless of context. So there are multiple scenes where go like, we surrender, we give up. And it's like, you're going to be murdered. That's what happens to everyone on both sides. Like, you would just go out guns a-blazing, or you'd kill yourself before you're captured or something. You wouldn't surrender in this world.
You know what's crazy too is that like so in the Pacific War in World War II, the Americans and Western soldiers would accept Japanese surrender for a little while, but then it got to the point that when like the Japanese faked surrender so much in order to be able to try to take somebody else with them that they just stopped taking chances, and that's the reason why all that crazy shit started happening, where they're just like, shoot the bodies, make sure they're dead, right? Mm-hmm. Don't go around looking for survivors, don't offer help, because there is such a good chance that they'll just pull out a grenade and try to kill you. And the toll that took on the survivors of the Pacific War is unfathomable, right? That is what drove those people crazy. That's one of the reasons why in the 50s and 60s, those survivors of the Pacific War were furious that Japan was kind of recovering and doing very well, right? Like that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. But the human aspect of like accepting surrender, that doesn't go away without like some kind of reason like that. So is that what's happening here? Is that like the Western forces people are like pretending to be injured and ask for water so that they can knife a federal soldier in the throat, or vice versa? Is that what we're doing?
No, I don't think there's any reason to assume that because we don't see it at all. All that we see in the movie is that everyone is just killing people who surrender constantly because they're terrible on both sides, which is insane. Paradox asks another good question. I've heard the criticism that the film lacks depictions of modern warfare tactics, like drone warfare and the like. Is that true? Yes, it certainly is true. There is no drone warfare in the movie at all. You would think that there would be. I would say
that raises an interesting thing that I noticed during this one. California and Texas have artillery, they have tanks, they have fighter jets, they have bombers, they have helicopters. Mm-hmm. They are insanely well equipped. The federal government has none of this. They have...
Well, hold on. The federal government has none of this anymore. Because by the time we get to see what the federal loyalist forces actually are like, the generals have given up and surrendered. And all that remains in DC, ostensibly, I'm putting this in heavy, heavy air quotes, the movie thinks the only people that are left in DC are like Secret Service agents that are loyal to the president.
They're driving around in Chevy Suburbans. Yeah, in the black Chevy Suburbans.
How do the Western forces have this much weaponry? I don't know. I know there's some military bases all over the place, including out west. But did the military? Who did the military side with? Did they split right down the middle based on what state they were in already? How does any of that work? Has it been going so long that the Western states have had time to build up all these supplies themselves? Who knows? They're just incredible.
Javelin missiles being launched off of offshore at California? It's did all the aircraft carriers and the bombers that we have out there?
Yes, that's insane because we have so many, especially over in Asia and that side of the world, that they would, assuming they stayed loyal to the federal government, which most of the states do, they could just come over to California and fuck their shit up. but they don't exist in the movie.
Yo.
The movie, in terms of military strategy, doesn't care about any of the realistic implications of this kind of warfare. It's like there are tanks sometimes and people shooting in the streets. That's really it. Oh, and there's fighter jets that like drop bombs on people, but
they
not
fly
like
over, but like they never really are active participants as far as we can tell. But they bring like they carry mortars into the siege of DC, and like oh my god, I like when we get to it, I would not. You know what? I'm just going for it. When they mortar the fucking Lincoln Memorial in this movie, a movie called like that's basically the sequel to the Civil War, they mortar. And as somebody who is from this area, right, like watching this happen, I did feel a little bit of like a little bit of like offense there, where I'm just like, you have created the most vapid American Civil War, the most shallow and pedantic Civil War scenario that you could possibly have thought of, and you are going to try to hit me where it hurts by showing people mortaring and destroying the Lincoln Memorial, something which represents the reunification of the country after one of the most devastating periods of its existence. Fuck you. Fuck you, Alex Garland. Eat my asshole. That is lazy. Absolutely lazy. It's the only reason that he picked, like, let's be honest here, that's the only reason that he decided to make a movie called Civil War, because this movie could have taken place in any other conflict in human history, any other modern war that has taken place. It could have been in Bosnia, right? This could have been in, like, Bulgaria, any one of those places in the Balkans that are always murdering each other for some reason or another, right? That nobody can decipher. He could have picked any of those. But the reason that he picked this one was to capitalize on the frayed political environment and to try to lend some gravitas to his stupid morality thing that he doesn't even really have basically it's just war is bad, right? That's the only reason. Yeah. That's the only reason.
He also, you might have mentioned this already, but he picks America because he wants it to be like, oh, it could happen to you too. You know, like that sort of stupid.
Yeah. And that's why he shows that scene of them mortaring the Lincoln Memorial, because he wants people to be like, look, don't you know, this stood for reunification after one of the most devastating periods in our history. Isn't it awful to see what happened? Well, he's not our history.
You know what this reminds me of? Alex Garland has this tendency to set things up for the sake of like a really dumb theme or message that makes no literal sense. So a textbook example for me is the scenes in Devs where Forrest moves even though he has no reason to move, so he can stand deliberately under the halo light around the tree so he can look like he has a halo behind his head. So he can be like, oh, isn't that ironic? He has a halo behind his head, but he's doing evil things. Oh my gosh, isn't that incredible? This is like, why is the battle even happening at the Lincoln Memorial?
Yeah, what would that strategic significance does that building hold?
Nothing. It adds literally nothing. He blows it up just for the sake of that stupid commentary. And the movie is full of that. It's crazy. So
this movie makes me angrier and angrier every time I talk about it.
It's really bad. It's really bad. I think. You know what's most infuriating about it to me is how well reviewed it is. That's
actually driving me nuts. Also, I want to mention Topaz brings up another good point in the chat. Why is the president in the White House and not a secret bunker? Yeah. They're 120 miles away in fucking Charlottesville before this thing is about to fall, right? Like, he has time to get out of there. The journalists learn that they're on the move before he does. He is in the Oval Office by the end of the movie. He has not even left.
Yeah. Well, Alex Garland wants the symbolism. He doesn't care at all that the president wouldn't be there. He'd be in like a situation room or in a bunker far away. You know, he'd be elsewhere.
But what's crazy is, like, you know what we've done before, like, especially in the Revolution when America was in the middle of a big fucking conflict. We just moved the capital. Yeah. It was in Philadelphia, then it was in Annapolis. Like, they just bumped it.
Hey, other man, places. You don't even want to go near Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Right. It's a shit show.
I mean, if New York is still loyal, why wouldn't he just go there?
Go to New York. I have no idea. Is it even really loyal, or is it like because there seems to be a lot of unrest. One assumes that's happening everywhere.
In all the major cities.
And the generals give up. So everyone seems to be turning on the federal government, kind of, but the other sides are also evil in large part. So I have no idea.
What's crazy? I just realized this too. Like, he doesn't do us the courtesy of showing us any of the characters in, like, when they get to the town where everything is fine and they ask her, they ask the clerk at the boutique, like, you do realize there's a pretty big civil war happening. And she goes, well, yeah, but we try to stay out of it. We just try to stay out of it. With everything we see on the news, that seems about right. That's, like, the only time we're going to see anything that isn't just pure murder and chaos. There's never one person that they meet who's like, yeah, but the Western forces are a problem.
Yeah.
Like, actually, I don't like them. They're invading my state, right? Like, there's nobody who's like proud to be an American in any one of these situations, or like is loyal to whatever side they're on, because he doesn't want to give us any of that.
Well, can I give you one exception to that? You know who's proud to be an American? Jesse Plemons.
Jesse Plemons, baby.
Jesse Plemons. Let's jump to him, because Jesse Plemons' character, through a bizarre and contrived series of coincidences that we can perhaps talk about later. We're jumping around. I'm fine with it. Kaylee Spaney ends up in a car. Instead of with the main people she's been driving with, she ends up with a car with another journalist from Hong Kong who they kind of met up with in a really bizarre scene. But anyway, she's in a car with that guy. They get captured because they drive ahead, because they're driving crazy fast ahead of our other characters.
How do they get taken out of the car? It doesn't matter. They're driving super fast.
People with guns stop them, pull them out of the car, take them over to a giant pit where they're putting a bunch of civilians in normal plain clothes into a giant hole in the ground, and they've killed a bunch of civilians. These people are in uniform, but there's no discernible features that tell you what faction they're a part of. Like, not a WF, not a 2-star thing. We have no idea what they're even doing.
Well, they mention that because they need to try to figure out who it is, and they're like, I don't know. They're like, oh, who is it? Ooh,
There's several scenes to that effect where it seems like the point, even though that's really stupid. So Jesse Plemons is the leader of this group, putting a bunch of bodies in a pit, and our main character's like, we gotta go save them. And Sammy's like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm not going anywhere near there. They're like, they're gonna kill us. They're gonna kill you. I'm not going over there. He's smart. I like him. He's hangs
smart, but I really got annoyed with him going, this is death. Death, I tell you. This is death.
Well, that's just bad material.
Yes. It's the material. It's not his fault. But yes. I appreciate that he's like, no, I'm not fucking doing that. Are you fucking crazy? Like, just leave him.
So they go over and they're like, hey, man, how's it going? They're like, who are you? They point the guns at him. And they're like, hey, we're just journalists. They lie. They say, we're journalists. He's like, where are you going? We're going down to Virginia because...
We're going to Charlottesville because they're reopening the college there.
And it's a feel-good story, and I feel like we all need that right now. It's a dumb lie. I don't know why he lies. It's not even clear why he lies, for example.
All of the characters make incredibly stupid decisions.
Yes, this is one of them. Stupid. Why he lies to him. It's so obvious he's lying because he's a really bad liar, for one. Why he's lying, I'm not even sure, because we don't even get a sense of why Jesse Plemons' character would be upset with them going down to the front lines. No idea why. We don't even know what faction he's in. Anyway, they lie to him, and then he starts asking them, like, oh, what kind of American are you? Or like, who are you? And then what kind of American are you?
I think what he does first is he's like, oh, this is my colleague. Like, these are my colleagues, and we're heading down. We're press, because he flashes that badge around a lot.
Oh
too.
Yeah, that's a funny line. Okay, so the only real joy I experienced in the movie is Jesse Plemons like being really antagonistic to everyone he's talking to in this scene. Yeah. Because I love Jesse Plemons as an actor. I think he's great. He really steals the scene here. He flashes the press badge and he says, "Oh, we're press," and he goes, "Oh, you are." Oh, so that's why it says press on the side of your vehicle.
No. That's not Jesse Plemons. That is my favorite scene in the movie, actually. We'll get to that after we do this. But he flashes the press badge around a lot, like it's going to protect him from anything. Yeah. And Jesse Plemons is like, oh, this guy. Like, he points at the Asian guy who's just been introduced. Gee, I wonder which one of the characters is going to die. He points at him and goes like, this guy's your colleague. and then he just shoots him, right? And that puts them all off, right? That puts them all off their game. He's got him on the back foot. And then he's like, no, we're American, we're American. He goes, okay, you're American. Well, what kind of American are you? Yeah, South American, Central American, North, you know.
It's like he's trolling them, and I actually find that kind of funny.
Yeah, and the guy said, and so this is the point where the main character, one of our main characters, says he's from Florida. And you would think, what faction is, like, you would think that that's a dangerous thing to be putting out there if Florida is a secessionist state. Like, and there are two major powers in this area, right? Like, we know the Loyalists and the Western forces. We don't, now granted, we don't know if the Western forces are antagonistic to the Florida Alliance or not, but we do know that the Loyalists are. So why would you go around telling everybody just lie and say you're from a different state in the South?
Say you're from New York, because that's literally where you're coming from, and that's where you work and live. This is a really dumb decision. Before we continue on with the scene, I want to respond to someone in chat before we forget to respond. So he asks, is the president in the film a Trump allegory? When I heard that there was an Antifa massacre, my eyes began to roll like a wheel. So we talked a little bit about the Trump allegory thing. There are some similarities to how the Nick Offerman president character is depicted to like what like left-wing fears about Trump are, right? There's some of that there.
It's not a bit
it's muddled and incoherent, so you could walk away not seeing that at all, or you could see it plain as day, and I feel like it's maybe somewhere in the middle. With regards to the Antifa massacre, this was a moment that is a throwaway line, but it totally like belies the whole this is an apolitical thing. So we find out that early on in this Civil War conflict, somewhere on the West Coast, I think Portland, there was an Antifa massacre, and Kirsten Dunst was there and took a famous photo, and that's why she's such a famous war photographer, right? That's all we get about it, but it sort of implies that Antifa were massacred by the federal government, right? That's what it seems to imply.
Yeah, I don't even know if it does, like, I don't know if it even implies that, because all she says is, man, that photo of the Antifa massacre. We don't know who did the massacring, because that it's tough, because like that's literally all you get. That's literally the only line is, oh yeah, you took that famous photo of the Antifa massacre. Shit, I'll never be that good. Something like that. That's basically it.
So what do you think is more likely, that Antifa massacre means the time that Antifa were massacred, or the time Antifa did some massacring?
Oh. Well, given how they are, honestly, it seems like a 50-50 thing. Like Antifa could have massacred a group of people. I don't even know, man. Like it's tough. It's really difficult. Like I think knowing Alex Garland, it's probably more that Antifa was massacred.
That's what I assumed based on other sort of implications in the movie. It is not made clear. You could take it either way. It's a totally offense writing thing, but based on his political commentary and other things he's made and comments he's made outside of this and other things that happened in the movie, I took it as, oh, the federal government massacred Antifa and wasn't that horrible. But that's all. It doesn't really impact anything else. It's just a throwaway line. But yeah, either way, it's not apolitical. I'll say that much. They could have made up a different faction or a different incident entirely, but they didn't, which is interesting.
Can we talk about how silly it is that the girl is shooting on black and white film with no light meter?
Did she have a light meter in her camera? Because some do.
I don't know. All I know is that there's a scene where she explains to Kirsten Dunst how to develop film in the field, as if Kirsten Dunst has not done, like, is not a fucking professional photographer.
Kirsten Dunst seems like surprised, like, oh wow, that is interesting. It's like, you don't know this? I mean, I guess she's using a digital camera, but like, still, you'd think she would at least understand.
Whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But like, my film camera has a light meter built into it. You don't need an external one, so maybe that's what she has. Doesn't really matter. Back to the Jesse Plemons scene. He tells him that he's from Florida, even though it's a really dumb idea. But it doesn't matter because Jesse Plemons doesn't really care where in America.
Central. He goes, Central.
Which he calls Florida Central America. It's like, okay, sure, but that doesn't bother him. He doesn't kill him over it. He's just like, oh, you're Central American. I'm like, okay, Does Alex Garland think Florida is Central America, or is it just supposed to be a funny thing this character thinks? Who knows?
Who
Anyway,
knows?
he asks Kaylee Spaney. She's very nervous. Obviously, she has a gun pointed to her head, but she says she's from Missouri. And then Kirsten Dunst says she's from Colorado. And she's like, now, see, that's what I'm talking about. That's America, about all these places, right? All three of them. He's like, now that's America. And then he's like, hey, what are you doing hiding back there? And there's another Asian guy. There's two Asian guys that are introduced 2 minutes before this scene happens. And he guesses on who gets killed in this scene. So this other one of the Asian guys has already been killed. The other Asian guys, these are both journalists. I guess they followed them from New York. They're also headed dead in the front lines. This journalist is shaking and quivering in his little boots, right? And he's not saying anything. And Jesse Plemons is like, hey, can you speak? Are you mute? And the guy shakes his head. He's like, oh, so you can speak. Do you speak English? And the guy, no, he says, can't you speak English? And the guy shakes his head, yes. And he's like, well, does that mean you can or you can't? He's just like fucking with him. And I like how he keeps stepping over people's lines and stuff like that. It's kind of funny and amusing. And this guy is really, really nervous. He eventually asks him, where are you from? And he says, Hong Kong. And I know it's supposed to be dark and brutal, but this is the funniest moment in the whole movie. He says, Hong Kong. And Jesse Plemons says, oh, China, and then shoots him. Which...
that got a laugh. I was the only person in my theater who laughed at that, and I think everybody kind of like...
was skeptical of you.
Everybody kind of like, I could feel some eyes, shift over in my direction. I was like, it was funny. It was pretty funny. Jesse Plemons is a funny guy. Also, I googled, is Florida Central America, and Google responded with, Florida is part of North America, as can be seen on a map. So Google is very snarky with me about that. So Alex Garland, either wrote it as like a funny thing that Jesse Plemons' character believes, or he just didn't Google it.
I'll assume for his sake that this is just a funny thing for Jesse Plemons to think. And so he kills the guy for being from China on the spot. Just kills him because he's not American. And so what have we learned about Jesse Plemons' character? Well, he seems to be on his own side, just going rogue and killing anyone who isn't American. Why? I have no fucking idea. But
why? And what does it even mean? Like that the guy. So this is where the real problem comes up, right? Is like, what does it even mean to be American now in an America where we've split 4 ways? And
I don't know, but he doesn't seem to look down on anyone from being from a different part of the country.
Yeah.
All he cares is that you're American, and if you're not, he murders you.
It's
funny because
the Florida
of how
Alliance part of America. It's
I found it very funny. It's not a good scene, really, because it makes no sense and it doesn't really tie into any of the overall themes. This is just more evidence that he's not concerned with the actual conflict between factions, but just like, this is a wasteland where everything's chaos now. That's his whole point, and it doesn't make any sense, but here we are. And Jesse Plemons has just gone rogue. He's like, I'm on my own side now. Anyway, so then he threatening to kill the rest of them because they're very upset about him killing the journalist in cold blood. And then classic movie bullshit. The truck being driven by Sammy just comes roaring into the frame, and we don't hear it coming because it's off screen, and smashes right into Jesse Plemons and I think Kaylee Spaney, knocking them both out. Well, it knocks Jesse Plemons and Kaylee Spaney into the pit full of bodies. Jesse Plemons is dead. He's gone from the movie.
Yeah, that's it. He's gone.
If you watched the trailer like I did and thought, well, at least we'll have him. He seems fun. This is the only scene he's in, and now he's gone. So that sucks. He's killed unceremoniously by a truck that just doesn't make any noise until it appears in the frame, which is awesome. Love that. Love it when movies do that. If anyone ever tells you that Alex Garland, at least he's a good director. No, he isn't. This is one example, but there are others that we'll get to. He makes these sort of classic, stupid movie bullshit decisions all the time. To we need it to be surprising that the truck comes, even though you'd be able to hear it coming from 100 yards away. Never mind that. It just smashes into Jesse Plemons and he saves the day. He says, "Get in the fucking car." And they all get into the car. And oh my God, Kaylee Spaney has been knocked into the pit of bodies and she has to crawl over the bodies. And it's like, oh my God, isn't war so horrifying? It's like, this doesn't even appear to be war. This is just one random serial killer, like just doing whatever he wants. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. It's not good. I don't like it. Don't listen to anyone who tells you that Alex Garland, oh, well, at least he's a really good director. Like, no, he isn't. Kevo, thank you. Oh, for $20. Thank you very much. Says, hope you two are doing well. Alex Garland can't write or direct to save his life. Not anymore, he can't. I feel pretty confident that he is not going to return to the quality level of Ex Machina or Dread or 28 Days Later ever again. I don't see how it's possible at this point. You know, if Annihilation was a fluke and Devs was a fluke and Men was a fluke and Civil War was a fluke, it's like, I don't know, man. We're piling up L's compared to W's here. Yeah, it's not good.
I mean, let's be generous. We'll give him 3 points. Ex Machina, Dread. Well, okay, I'll give him 2 because I haven't watched Dread for a while, but I feel like it would probably hold up.
I've heard nothing but good things about Dread, so I'll give him that W.
Okay, Dread, 28 Days Later, and Ex Machina. He has 3 points positive there, but then he also has The Beach, and then he has everything else.
Oh yeah, I didn't like The Beach at all. I didn't even finish it. I was on a plane and I didn't even finish it. You know, like, you know how crazy that is? It's so easy to watch a movie on a plane because you have literally nothing else to do often, you know?
It often colors people's... Like, whenever somebody tells me they watched something and they enjoyed it, and then they tell me they watched it on a plane, I'm like, try watching it again and tell me if you still enjoy it. Like,
sometimes if I'm on a long flight, I'll pick a movie that I've been avoiding because it's too long. And I'm like, well, now's as good a time as any to watch Magnolia, and I like Magnolia. Magnolia was I have watched it since Not on a Plane, and I do still really like it. Anyway, I watched The Beach on a plane, and even that was really annoying that I had to stop. And that's based on a novel he wrote. I am convinced. I don't know. I still quite can't explain how his 3 W's even happened.
Who knows? I think editing saved Ex Machina.
Yeah, but like what about 28 Days Later and Dread?
28 Days Later, I'll give. That's a.
It's a tough question.
Danny Boyle.
Perhaps.
Danny Boyle is also a pretty good director, but he also did The Beach. So, that's tough, man. But he did Train Spot. Wait, did Alex Garland do Train Spotting? Hold on, let me. I need to.
No, he did not.
He didn't have a single hand. Danny Boyle directed it.
Yeah, but Alex Garland did not write Train Spotting. Okay. Not even a little bit.
Oh no. Irvine. Well, story by Irvine.
This is something I've definitely thought before, and I still think it's true. Someone mentioned Alex and Zack Snyder competing for the top spot. I've said this before, and I still think it's true after Civil War that Alex Garland is art house Zack Snyder. That is the best way of understanding him, I think.
That's I watched Batman v Superman on a plane.
I liked the Money Pit.
I love the Money Pit. That is my response to that.
Brief thing I wanted to mention because I just saw it again in the trailer before we jump to any of the other like incidents that occur in no real particular order along the way. Setting that aside, this movie is a sort of road trip movie essentially from New York City in a big sort of hook motion all the way down to Charlottesville and then to DC, right? Everywhere is just Atlanta, Georgia. All right. Anywhere that's like out in the countryside or in a rural area or in a small town, it's all Georgia. It all looks like Georgia. I know because I live here, and it's very, very. I went to school in Pennsylvania. I grew up in Maryland. I know I've been to West Virginia and DC and all this stuff. I know what all these places look like, and it's very distracting to me to be like, "Yep, that's Georgia. Yep, that's Georgia. Look how like red and orange the clay dirt is. Like this is, I don't know. This is maybe a nitpick thing. If you're not familiar with any of these areas, you won't be distracted by it. I was horribly distracted by how much none of this looked like Pennsylvania or Virginia or West Virginia.
Yeah,
it was frustrating.
Yeah.
It's a little thing. It doesn't really matter. I can get over it. If the movie was great otherwise, I wouldn't care. Anyway, let's talk about some of the other incidents along the way. We talked about the gas station. There's a brief scene. There's a lot of time wasting scenes where they say basically nothing about their characters' backstories and stuff like that.
I was actually gonna jump into, because Topaz mentioned the Jesse Plemons scene and the sniper scene are inconsequential to the. Actually, real quick before we continue with that, Kevo, thanks for the super chat, bud. We are both doing well. You are correct. Alex Garland cannot direct to save his life. He had some hits early on. He can write. I know he can. I know he's got it in him. 28 Days Later and Dread and Ex Machina, pretty good.
I'm not convinced he can anymore. Whatever happened, I don't see him recovering. But you know,
anyway,
we'll leave the possibility open.
Let's go back to the sniper scene. That was my favorite scene in the movie, and I actually legitimately enjoyed that scene because of the way that it like kind of takes.
It's on the characters, yeah.
Well, it takes a shot at not even just the characters, but at Alex Garland's writing style in the first place. So this is when they pull up to a like a road that's covered in Christmas decorations, right? And they're like, "What the fuck?" And there's a dead guy in the middle of the road, right? And they look at, they're like, "Oh, we could find another way. I guess we could find a different way to go." And
also, really quick, it's been years. The movie implies that this has been raging for years, and all these like drive-through Christmas decorations are still up and making Christmas noises and sounds, like, and blowing bubbles. That bubble machine has just been going for how long now?
The guy just really leaves the house and refills it just in case.
Oh, it's really stupid. Anyway, there's a dead guy in the road. Keep going.
So there's a dead guy in the road, and they're like, "Oh, should we? What do we do? What do we do? Do we drive this way? Do we go around, find a different route, or whatever?" And they go, "All right, I'm gonna," like, they have some hesitation, but they decide to test it. And as they start going out, surprise, surprise, they start getting fucking shot at. So they floor it. They like pull the car over. They all get out and duck. They're being shot at, and they notice two military guys who are hiding, like kind of like lying down, being quiet. One spotting for the other, and this is where Jamie from Devs shows up. So, like, I noticed that he was, which is, I'll do a little sidetrack here. Every main cast member from Devs, except for Kenyon and Katie, appear in this movie in some place.
Yeah.
So, in some role. So, Jamie from Devs is the sniper with the painted fingernails. And the
they have painted fingernails and like weirdly colored dyed hair. I don't know what the point of that was, but okay.
It's like this, like that meme about Zoomers going into Vietnam and having like a Pickle Rick sticker on their helmet and a pinup of Belle Delphine in the.
Is that what it was supposed to? I don't know. I didn't get what that was.
That's what it seemed like to me. Is just like like all these. This is funny. It's like I'm a farmer in rural China. Gets shot. Some kid with a helmet, a Pickle Rick helmet, teabags my corpse.
That's funny. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So they get over there, and this is the first instance where he starts waving his press badge around. He's like, "We're press, and he keeps saying it. One of the snipers is just like, "Oh, that makes sense. Now I understand why it says it on the side of your vehicle."
Yeah,
and like he keeps doing, like, he keeps asking him all these questions about like who's in the house, who's shooting at us, what's going on, and the guy goes, "Oh, I see," because they're like, you got to stay quiet, you got to stay down. There's somebody in that house. We're trying to take him out. He goes, "Who is it? What's he fighting for? What side is he on?" He goes, "Oh, I see. You're retarded."
He doesn't say that, but he says
something
like that.
Yeah, he does.
Wait, does he say retarded?
Yes, he does.
Oh,
he absolutely does. That's why, and I laughed. That's why I laughed at that's why I like the scene, because I'm like, this is exactly what I would be saying to these characters were I to encounter them, because I'm just like, you guys act retarded. Like, you're acting like you're telling me you're press. I can read it on the side of your truck, right? You're asking me all these questions about whoever's shooting me from inside this house in this insane setup of like Christmas decorations that are blowing bubbles and playing "Here Comes Santa Claus," right? I don't know any more than you do. I'm just trying to take care of the problem. Stop asking questions. Just let me do my job. And he keeps babbling, and the guy is like, it's so fucking funny.
I wish I remembered him saying that part. I probably would have laughed.
Yeah, he says, I see, you're retarded. And yet, like, Topaz is making a good point, though. It's like, what I don't get is why they don't get mad when they come running right up to them, presumably revealing their location to the house sniper. Yeah, That doesn't make any fucking sense. But, Jamie from Devs makes a good shot, gets him.
And then that's the end of the scene.
Yep.
We never see those
we
guys
never see
again.
those guys again.
We never know what faction they're a part of. I mean, like, it's reasonable to be like, I don't know, there's a guy in there. We haven't talked to him yet. We're just trying to take him out because he's shooting at us. So, like, shut the fuck up and let us do our job. That all makes sense. But we don't even know who these people are, who these soldiers are. Are they the same faction as Jesse Plemons? Jesse Plemons has silly glasses. Does that mean he's in the same faction as the people with painted nails and weirdly dyed hair? I have no idea.
No idea.
So then, but then it's like, oh, a masterclass in tension. It's like, oh, they're being shot at by a sniper. Then what happens? Oh, we got him.
I've got good news.
Next scene.
Next scene.
Useless.
Alex Garland and his fucking incredible creation of scenes and tension and drama and stakes. Oh man, he's so good at it. Boy, the bear in Annihilation was so fucking cool. Okay. Yeah, no, scene's over. And yeah, the sniper does not immediately change positions or get mad that people ran over to him when he's perfectly well hidden. Like,
hey, what are you guys doing? Why are you laying on the ground? What's going on here? We're press.
We're press. Did you know that? We're press. What are you doing? What's happening? Who's in that house? Why are they shooting at you?
It's like, shut up, dude. Okay, so that's one of the many encounters along their like odyssey through
that's interesting.
cynicism.
Topaz is saying that a lot of positive reviews are pointing to the sniper scene as being a perfect summation of the movie.
Well, it's a perfect summation of the like senselessness and like nonsense of the political factions. It's just like, I don't know, there's violence happening. Isn't that horrible?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know. Who knows who's trying to kill us? We're just trying to kill them before they kill us.
The only thing I would say that makes it not the movie in a nutshell, it's like one of the only amusing scenes. So it's not indicative of the tone of the whole movie, but like, I don't know. I feel like I don't know if there is one coherent thing that this movie is. This movie is a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of competing ideas and instincts that are all half-baked and ill-executed. It's lame. It's really lame. Yeah, but that's an incident that doesn't really amount to anything. It's just like a mild inconvenience along the way. What are some of the other incidents? Because I know things really change after the Jesse Plemons one, so we'll circle back to that in a minute. But like, what were some of the other incidents? Oh, random stuff like, oh, they're just talking about being a war photographer and how, war is hard and whatever, they're bonding, whatever. When they're at the gas station, Kaylee Spaney was too scared by the guys who were hanging those guys up and torturing them for being looters that she was too scared to even take a picture. And she's like, I don't know if I can handle this.
Why didn't I just tell him not to shoot him? Like, I don't know. Why didn't you? It's like he gives him a choice. It's just like, we could either beat him up a little bit more and let him go, or just kill him right now. I'll let you decide. And she's just like, oh God, why didn't I just tell him not to kill him? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe something's wrong with you. Maybe you're retarded. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So we get scenes of like bonding in air quotes between these characters, and like some of that stuff is okay. For example, when they go to the little town where everything seems to be fine, they're in a store and Kaylee Spaney's like looking at clothes and stuff like that, and she's like trying to get Kirsten Dunst to like lighten up a little bit. And she's like, why don't you try on this dress? And she's like, I'm not trying on a dress or whatever. And she convinces her to try on the dress and like takes her picture. And she like says something to make her laugh to take a picture of her. And you can tell Kirsten Dunst is like uncomfortable at like being like happy and smiling and stuff like that. And like Kaylee Spaney's trying to like bring it out of her a little bit, get her to lighten up and open it up. It doesn't really amount to anything. It's not part of a character arc. It's just little details where they kind of feel like real people. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is passable. This is passable character moments.
Speaking of character moments and like, what did you think of the main male character trying to seduce Kaylee Spaney?
I mean, it was fine.
Yeah.
It seems believable.
Yeah. It seems believable if just like a little bit like, I mean.
She's a pretty young girl and they're in like, and she wants to come with them. They're in a tough situation. She's in the same sort of line of work, so they have stuff in common. He's not aggressive about it. He's not obnoxious. about it. I thought he would go in a grosser direction.
Yeah,
especially when
I was a little worried that it was going to do something like that. But yeah, I'm glad it didn't.
Especially when Alex Garland said ahead of time that this was going to be a companion piece to Men.
Yeah.
Men is a very like sexist against men movie. Anyway, but he's just like, he tries to flirt with her and she doesn't really seem interested. And he's like, okay, well, if you need anything, I'll be here, kind of thing. Like that seemed fine. I was fine with that. Like there's little moments sprinkled through that if everything else were good, I would like. But because everything else is stupid and the movie's so like gut-wrenchingly boring, I'm like, I don't care about these people enough to like see them have little moments with each other. You know what I mean? I don't like they don't It's very hard to relate to these characters, right? Because they don't have strong opinions about the conflict, except that the conflict is bad, but they need to do their jobs and sort of tell the story objectively and unbiased. Like, and their whole goal that we're meant to be rooting for is them getting an interview with the president. And I'm like, he doesn't even do interviews. Who is this even for? What is this going to accomplish? Why do I care?
Who do you even work for? Who do you
in the final conflict? They're like in an actual battle in DC, and much of that battle is focused on these characters like kind of running out into danger to like try to get a good shot. And I'm like, I'm not rooting for you guys. Like, why do you like? Why do I care about this? You know, why? First of all of the soldiers are wearing GoPros and stuff like that on their helmets. You know, like this is being documented. You know, it's like the war in Iraq, which is very, very well documented. Like you can just go watch that stuff if you want in Afghanistan. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're not suffering from a lack of information about what's happening in a lot of these conflicts. Typically speaking, there's almost too much information, if anything.
Alex Garland shows up as a soldier in the DC invasion as well.
You told me this was going to happen, but I didn't see him. When did that? What?
Okay, so they're climbing up onto a roof, and he's the team leader who kind of like he climbs up over he climbs up over the ledge with his pistol, and he kind of clears the room and then lets him. It's a very small cameo, but he does show up. He's one of the team. He's one of the team leaders as they climb onto the roof in DC.
Okay, sure. I didn't notice him at all. He's never had a cameo in any of his other stuff.
I haven't noticed it. Yeah.
Interesting. Jen says, I'm still mad that the one photographer is shooting on film for no reason. Yeah, this is not the job where you want to be shooting on film. You know, you want to be able to take a ton of pictures and like have a really reliable camera. It's not about the aesthetics and the graininess of film. You're a war photographer. Use like what the best and easiest tool. Another thing
you can't even get clean drinking water, but like you can get your hands on film.
Yeah, that's and film developer and all that stuff. Love the scene where she's explaining to the seasoned photographer, like, oh, how you can develop film in the field. And Kirsten Dunst has the nerve to be like, oh, that is interesting. Like she doesn't already know. That was dumb. Jen, you would also be annoyed, because Jen is a photographer, you'd be annoyed that hardly at any point in the movie do they use zoom lenses. It's like you're in the most chaotic situation possible where like you don't know how far away you're going to be from the action. You would have a zoom lens, right? You wouldn't be using prime lenses that only have like one focal length that you have to shoot everything from. If you want to get a shot of something over there and like frame things a certain way, you would have a zoom lens. The only time they have a zoom lens is when they're using it like a scope to like see.
Yeah, that's when they pull up to the Christmas thing and she uses the zoom lens as a scope to try to find where somebody is. They're like she's using it as like a way to check out, you know, the surrounding area.
Yeah, but they're not using it for the sake of photos ever.
Oh my god, that's right. Yeah. They only use lenses.
The movie is not at all concerned with anything of what it really takes to be a war photographer in a technical sense, even, or an ethical sense. You know what I mean? There's no discussion, like we said, of, you know, what story they're trying to tell with their photos, right? There's no discussion of that. There's no discussion. They don't do anything interesting like the way Nightcrawler does about like staging things a certain way. You know, they don't play with that at all. You know, we're not interested in any of that.
Yeah, and there's no like, none of the characters are interesting in the way that Jake Gyllenhaal's character in Nightcrawler is, where he's like corrupted by this pursuit of success into believing that this is like anything for the shot is the moral and ethical thing to do, despite the harm that it causes to people around them. It's not interested in exploring that. It's not interested in exploring everything that they've, like, really in any depth, whatever everything that they've seen has done to them, or what it's going to do to them. It's not interested in exploring their ideas of, watching their own country fall apart like this. And, like, it's not interested in any of that. It's
it cares. They care about getting the shot, and there are moments in the middle of, like, horrible brutality where they're like, "Oh, that was a good shot. That was a great photo. Good job." And I'm like, I don't care about this at all. Like, there's no sense from the movie that their photos impact anything at all. Also,
especially because they kind of tell us that, like, I mean, there's a very brief line in the Jesse Plemons scene where they mention that they work for Reuters, the news company. That's the only that, like, and he goes, "That doesn't sound very American," which is really funny.
It is a funny line, yeah.
But like, they do mention that the New York, like, he says something like, "Oh, you're just gonna sit around, doing whatever for whatever's left of the New York Times." It's like, okay, so the New York Times doesn't exist anymore. The newspaper circuit, like, the dollar has collapsed, right? Like, we're at a position, like, Philadelphia is a war zone. New York is a war zone. One assumes that every other city, apparently apart from DC, which is devoid of human life, is a war zone. So who's circulating the newspapers that these people are taking the pictures for? Like, why are they so concerned?
Maybe internationally. That's the only logic I can think of. Like, it's not this news is not
Europeans like Alex Garland observing this. Yeah, probably. I mean, that's it. That's the only.
There's no commentary at all about, like, what role the photos even have. All they say is, like, "Oh, we're letting people make up their own minds about it. We're not telling a story," which is naive and stupid. Not at all how it works.
Matthew
I had a quick
Cooper.
thought.
Matthew Cooper, real quick before you do that. Matthew Cooper, super chat. Anyone remember a movie with actual factions called Children of Men? This is so much worse. Children of Men is pretty good. I remember I've rewatched it a couple times. I like that movie a lot.
I quite like it too. I've only seen it the once, but I really enjoyed it. It's more interesting from a filmmaking perspective. The factions are more interesting, and that central story. I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it because I do recommend it. But like, when we finally find the thing everyone's been looking for, like, that moment hits really hard. Yeah. It's like it's a surprisingly emotional movie.
What's crazy is that it's a post-apocalyptic, sci-fi Civil War thing. Everything is hell. Yep. But they give us a reason why people are fighting.
Yeah. they sure do. And it takes place in the country where the person writing it is familiar with.
Or is familiar with. Wait, who did that? Wasn't it Inarritu or? No,
I meant the right. It's based on a book by P.D. James.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Looking up. So it takes place in London and elsewhere in England. A quick thought I had. Assuming you do not a page one rewrite, but quite a heavy rewrite of this movie and fix a lot of the problems we've talked about, giving the factions more interesting perspectives and caring at all about the actual factions, and doing a more interesting exploration of what it means to be a war photographer, other than, isn't it really hard on people? And it's like, well, yeah, no shit. So is war. We don't really care about that, it seems. Assuming all those problems were fixed, wouldn't it also, don't you think it might have been more interesting for this to be a found footage movie?
Yeah. I think somebody mentioned earlier that it could have been shot like Cloverfield and it would have hit a little bit harder. And it's like, yeah, no, I mean, I still would want to understand why this is happening. I don't think that, but no, yeah, I think if it was a found footage movie, absolutely. Like,
well, that could be interesting, like we're seeing we're seeing essentially the result of their work constantly. I mean, we see some photographs in the movie, but, like, we don't see, like, if there was some way of justifying, for example, that not a lot of footage of this conflict was getting out because of whatever restrictions, and that there are daring journalists going into the chaos to, like, record it so people can see what's really happening here, then you give them a justification and you get to experience it like you imagine people elsewhere, either abroad or in other areas of the country are experiencing this material for themselves. But the news is still happening constantly. So like these photos, like I don't know what they're getting from it.
Who are they for? Like, I mean, yeah.
What's the point?
What's the point?
Let's talk about the exploration of what it means to be a war photographer, which is what the film is primarily concerned with, more than the Civil War aspect of Civil War. So, I don't know many war journalists in real life. Did they actually act like that in real life with such disregard for humans and lacking all empathy? I don't know any personally, but from what I understand, absolutely not. Let's start with like people who deal with like the worst evils of humanity on a regular basis, like I don't know, homicide detectives, people who work trying to hunt down people who abuse children, people who do sort of journalism or aid work in some of the most like war-torn areas in the world where some of the worst things are happening to people. People who deal with that sort of stuff all the time. This is especially true for like homicide detectives and people like that. They tend to have a pretty like dark sense of humor about things, right?
Yeah, there's some gallows humor. Like
there's some gallows humor because
cope with horrible stuff that way.
Oh, if you ever read, for example, like the Gulag Archipelago and some books of people who survived from like the Gulag and like concentration camps and stuff like that, it might surprise you to learn just how funny they make it all seem. In a way that's like it's not funny at all, obviously, but you have to kind of make it funny to like get through it. Right. I read the book Mindhunter that the show Mindhunter is based on. It's not a narrative book. It's like a nonfiction book describing his history of like hunting serial killers and starting the whole criminal profiling aspect of the FBI and the CIA and all that. No, it is the FBI. Sorry. Anyway, I read that book and it's very funny. Like he's very funny about it. And it's like he's describing things that are some of the most horrific shit you ever heard in your life, but he's really funny about it. I didn't really get much of any of that in this movie. A little bit of like Walter, whatever his name is, Joel, that guy. He has a little bit of an attitude where like he's making jokes about like how hard he is when he sees
when he sees the gunfire and he's like, oh yeah, let's go. Doesn't that get you so fucking hard,
where he's just like it's not doing that as well as I would hope, but there's a little bit of like he's treating it kind of flippantly to like cope with it a little bit. He's so excited about like getting in the action that he's kind of like a thrill seeker. So there's a little bit of that. But like, for example, Kirsten Dunst's character is the main person we do all this sort of character development of. And she is just really cynical and jaded and like has given up on humanity, essentially, is sort of the idea. She's the one who says, I thought when I was sending all those photos back home, I was saying, don't do this. I was sending a warning. She sees America in the Civil War and all the chaos and all the violence, and she's just kind of like really closed off and jaded, like lost hope. She doesn't really care about who wins. She's just trying to do a good job and get the photos, right? And as people are being killed around her, she eventually gets really upset about it. When Sammy is his name. When he gets killed, she's pretty upset and she kind of loses her composure a little bit. And in the end, we'll talk about how it happens, but she saves Kaylee Spaney's life. She, in a really cliche, dumb way, sacrifices herself to save Kaylee Spaney. So what is her arc exactly? She's really cynical and jaded, and then she does something self-sacrificial. She never really stops being cynical and jaded. I guess you could say eventually, like, the loss of life gets to her, but it's not really a character arc. We're not really exploring questions of, is being really cynical and jaded and closed off emotionally so you can make it through with what happens. Is that the way to survive this? Is that a healthy attitude? Is there like a negative consequence to that where like you for example, if we could have played with the idea like, oh, she photographed something happening that maybe she could have stopped if she took off her journalist hat and actually was a real person, but we don't explore that. We don't explore anything to the degree of like, what what the appropriate attitude to have in this sort of situation is, or like she doesn't really have to learn anything or grow as a person. We're not interested in exploring that at all. The most character development and change we get in the movie is that Kaylee Spaney goes from someone who wants to do this work because she thinks it's important and because she's a little bit of a thrill seeker, and she goes through hell seeing all these horrible things and becomes a bit more like callous.
Yeah, she becomes a bit more like
yeah, and that's really all we get. And so what's the main takeaway from that? Is it an exploration of anything interesting? Not really. Really what we get with Kaylee Spaney is, war takes a toll on people. And you're like, yeah.
It's the same, and we get something similar with the male protagonist as well, who goes from being sort of like, oh, isn't it so sexy to be in the middle of all the fire? Oh man, my blood gets hot when I'm in the middle of live fire, you know? Isn't that so cool? He is also like he's kind of like when they, in that scene with the militia, who are in Hawaiian shirts and jeans and Kevlar vests, right? Fighting against the military, who then execute the military people. Isn't he sort of like laughing and partying with them when they start mutilating the corpses with a railgun? Or am I misremembering?
I don't remember, but he wasn't opposed to it. None of them were opposed to it, really.
Yeah, he's like, and then like after they're done with that, he's like, "Woo! Yeah, wasn't that so great?" And then he gets to the end.
They're all celebrating because they got the good shots.
Yeah,
so
and then when they get to the end. Oh yeah, sorry, continue.
But go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say when he gets to the end, like after people who he knows die. Right? Like he's perfectly fine with soldiers being executed after surrendering and then having their corpses mutilated. But then when he puts himself and his friends in a dangerous situation and then gets one of them hurt because getting them out of it, he starts drinking heavily, gets really mad that they're not going to get the shot because, it's possible that they're going to miss the fall of DC. And then when he gets to DC and Kirsten Dunst's character gets shot in front of him, he turns into a jaded, like, sad, like, oh, I came here to do this thing. Fine. Like, gets the quote and then, like, just allows the president to be executed in front of him.
Yeah.
And it's like, so that's the only other character development that we get, is that he goes from being...
so by implication, I'm glad you mentioned that because I almost forgot really, but by implication, some of these people really suck. So they're watching people who surrender get killed indiscriminately. They do nothing to try to convince any of the soldiers they're with not to do that anymore. They don't really seem to care when people are brutally killed. They either go, oh, you just gotta take the shot and not get emotionally invested in what's happening here, or they are so successful at that they don't even seem to mind, and they're all celebrating all the good shots they got. Like, for example, they're sort of laughing and celebrating one night when they get to like a refugee camp. Nothing of import happens there, but they're celebrating that they got all this good footage. And it's like, you just saw people surrender getting brutally murdered, and you don't care. Meanwhile, later, Sammy gets killed when they're fleeing Jesse Plemons and the people involved in whatever the hell is happening there. One of them shoots at the car and manages to shoot Sammy through the abdomen. Later, he's going to die right essentially when they arrive at the front lines at the Western forces. And he's upset that Sammy is dead, and he's upset that he's maybe not going to be able to get the interview he wanted before they capture the president. He's more concerned with getting the interview than the president being deposed. You know what I mean? Like, he's so selfishly motivated for the sake of this interview. Like, what is it even going to accomplish? But he's like, there's really dumb scenes where music is playing and he's like screaming his head off because he's that upset.
Oh, my God.
They're awful.
Yeah,
they're incredibly
that
cringe.
Was so cringy, dude. He's like just shrieking into the void. It was me driving home from watching this movie.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And there's first of all, there's a lot of scenes in this movie where the sound cuts out and there's only music playing and stuff's happening in slow motion, and it never works.
Like the openings of Devs,
Yeah, it's very annoying. So he's very upset about not being able to get this story because he thinks Sammy died for no reason now. Because
now they're not going to be able. But Sammy wasn't even trying to go to DC. He just wanted a free ride to Charlottesville. And he was trying to warn them against
going to
DC.
You're right. It doesn't even work in that regard. Oh my God. You're right. It's because Sammy didn't want them to try to get the interview for the president. He wasn't like on board with that, and that's why he came. He came because he wanted to come to the front lines, and they got killed along the way. But since they aren't going to be able, they got to the front lines. He didn't survive all the way there, but they got there. But now that they think they might not get the chance to interview the president, he's really upset that Sammy died for nothing. Really stupid. Doesn't even make sense. But also,
well, sorry, continue. Sorry.
He's later at the finale of the movie. You know what? I should save it. Go.
Oh, okay. Go so I was gonna say, like, let's break down exactly why and how, like, what happened to kill Sammy, right? Like, how did Sammy end up getting into the situation where he died? And so basically, as they're driving, the two Chinese journalists come up on them very quickly. They burn out their tires, and they think they're being chased, so they're kind of like, uh-oh. But they don't react in a way that actually makes sense if you think somebody hostile is coming after you. They kind of they're like, oh, just slow down and let them pass. It's like, if you think they're chasing you, they're not going to pass you. They're not going... You slowing down is not what you want to be doing in that situation. But fine, whatever. It's a stupid movie. So... As this truck that's following them comes alongside, they realize it's their two friends from Hong Kong who are part of the group. And one of the Hong Kong guys goes, "I'm coming to your car," and so he climbs over from one moving vehicle into the other. And they're all clapping, they're all laughing, they're all like, "Yay! Wow, you did it! Wow, that's so cool!" And then Kaylee Spaney, for like no reason, goes, "I'm gonna do it too," and climbs over into the other car, and then that guy takes off down the highway. The only reason, really, that this incident even happens, that Sammy ends up in a situation where he might be killed, is because they have to follow those people who got captured by Jesse Plemons, which would not have been a problem had Kaylee Spaney stayed in the car. And they don't do anything with that. Later
no,
on.
They don't do anything with that. The only thing, first of all, it's a very dumb thing to do, and the only reason it happens is to separate them.
Yeah, it's the only reason for the sake of the story. Now, granted, you can always read in. Sorry, yeah.
It's very contrived, but I think you have to assume that they were kind of lying in wait along that road, and that they would have run into these people anyway. Which puts them in another dangerous situation, just a different one.
Yeah, kind of, but like at the same time, we don't really know how they managed to get them out of the car.
Well, they have guns pointed at them and stuff like that. I don't know.
But if you're driving at 70 something miles an hour on the middle of the highway, like just guns pointed at you, like they can take the shot. Like it's a pretty low chance.
We gloss over how any of that happens, but I just mean that, like, if they got captured, so would have Sammy and them.
Okay, fair enough. But they don't do anything with the idea that, like, and, fair enough, but, like, that could be, a conversation between Kirsten Dunst and Kaylee Spaney of, like, well, it probably would have happened anyway, right? They were clearly lying in wait.
Yeah, they're not exploring...
They don't explore any, like, potential guilt from any of the characters over any of these problems. They just go, oh, yeah, we all loved Sammy. Now he's dead. We're all sad. Like, there's a lot more you can dig into there, and the movie is completely uninterested in doing it. It's basically the point that I'm trying to make.
I agree. The only thing in terms of character development we do with Kirsten Dunst, who similarly is more obsessed with getting the shot than, like, trying to help any of these situations... Like, I mean, I can't believe the movie didn't even bother, like, introducing one situation where she had to decide whether to be the war photographer who just documents what's happening or actually do something about it. Can't believe the lack of interest in exploring that idea. But there's one moment where Kaylee Spaney asks Kirsten Dunst, "Oh, if I get shot, like, are you going to take that photo?" And Kirsten Dunst's like, "Yeah, what do you think?" Like, obviously, I'm going to take that photo, because that's my job. And then later on, she takes a photo of Sammy dead in the car and then deletes it. I don't even quite understand why she deleted it, but I guess the movie presents it as something of growth, where, like...
She realizes that she's not as callous as she thought.
Yeah, it's so weak. It's so flimsy. I want to just get to DC now because there's nothing else really important that we skipped in the journey along the way.
No, not really. Yeah,
We get to DC. We get to DC, and like the battle just basically starts immediately. The battle is happening all over the like mall area, like from the White House to the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. There's like battle happening. There's gunfire and like mortar stuff going off everywhere. Meanwhile, we're told that all the major generals have already surrendered, and the only people that are still fighting are like rogue Secret Service agents local to the president. Well, why is the battle happening all across the city with gunfire happening everywhere? Who knows? Why are they holed up?
The only thing that I can assume is that the Western forces are coming in and just fucking murdering all the civilians who are left in DC, and they're trying to hold their own. That's
we don't see any of it, so it doesn't really factor.
It doesn't factor in. It does, but like, why is it happening all over the city? Who knows?
Well, no, you know what I think it is? I think Alex Garland said everyone's basically surrendered except for like a few remnants in like by the White House. But then they wanted the climactic scene of like helicopters flying over a war-torn DC because the themes and the imagery of that is something he wants, but he didn't earn because it makes no story sense. That's what I think happened. I don't think the Western forces actually aren't killing random civilians unless that's what Jesse Plemons is. I have no idea what
we don't even know. And they're not killing random civilians, but they do kill that woman in DC who surrenders with her hand up.
I know, and she's yes, I know. I'm just saying that like I don't think there's any reason to believe that the reason that there's gunfire and explosions happening all over DC, even though that shouldn't be the case, is because the Western forces are just killing civilians. I don't think we should assume that. That doesn't make the Western forces like not kind of culpable in a lot of horrible things, but
that's true. I guess we should just assume that there's stuff happening. We don't know what. That's like
he wanted the big battle scene at the end. But he didn't earn it. He shouldn't have done the whole thing where he says that, oh, they've basically surrendered. Everyone but the president has already surrendered. Like he shouldn't have said that because
why
that
is he
ruined
in the fucking Oval Office if he's already like.
Yes, there's that. So there's a battle happening, and it's like dumb military strategy and tactics that don't really make a lot of sense, and it goes on for a while. If you think of any fine details you want to talk about here, go ahead. We see a lot of our war journalists like risking their safety to get good shots, and the movie keeps pausing whatever climactic like noise and chaos is happening to like show the shots they get, and I'm like, I don't care about this anymore. Most of the shots aren't even especially interesting. There's like one or two that like, okay, if that was on the cover of like Time magazine, I could see why that would be a really dramatic photo, but a lot of them aren't. And it's
most of them are just crap.
You keep pausing the action to show me these shots, and I'm like, I don't care. I'm not rooting for them to get these shots. I'm not rooting for them to get an interview. Like, I just want this movie to be over. It's incredibly dull and boring. So we finally get to the White House, and there's like a big fortification around the White House they're trying to get inside of, and they're doing battle with the forces. And at one point, some like Chevy Suburbans like that would carry the president in a what's it called?
Convoy.
Yes, they come roaring out and they're like, oh, they're trying to escape. So they use Humvees and stuff to like crash into them and incapacitate them. And they're like, get out of the car. And a couple Secret Service agents get out and they shoot them. And then
the First Lady gets out of the car at one point. There's a woman in the back seat of one of these SUVs who comes out with her hands up, and she's just executed immediately.
Was she the First Lady?
I think that's what you're supposed to assume, because they said that it's the president and the president and his family are supposed to be in there, and they're like, oh, the president and all of them are like, they're getting ready to leave, and that's like, it's supposed to be like, who's that? Who else is that supposed to be? Because there's the secretary of the press is the one who surrenders later and just gets shot.
I assumed it was random aide or Secret Service person, but if it is the First Lady, I guess that's like a attempt. It wasn't made clear either way, but I guess that's an attempt to be like, oh, look how horrible he is, because this is a diversion. This is like they sent these cars out, and then they get captured immediately and shot at, and they start killing everyone indiscriminately, which they wouldn't do. It makes no sense, but it's just brutal for the sake of being brutal, because that's what this movie is. And then Kirsten Dunst is the only person to be like, nah, he's not going to be in that car. He's still in the White House, I bet. And so she convinces the other journalists to go into the White House to see if he's in there. And so they're roaming around. Eventually, the Western Forces soldiers realize that no, the president wasn't in that car. If that was the first lady, was the implication that he just sent his own wife to die so he could survive?
Yeah,
that wasn't
I thought that's what it was going for. Like, I really did. I guess it doesn't have. I guess it's not like it isn't made clear. That's just how I read it when I saw it. So,
I mean, that's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if it was just an attempt to be like, see, no, look, he is really evil. And it's like, I don't know. They sent a diversion out, and they got killed either way, whether the first lady was in there or whether that was just a woman.
Because they find him in the fucking Oval Office hiding under his desk.
Yes.
What was even... Really, what was...
It's really stupid. Did you think they weren't going to notice? It's really stupid. Eventually, they go into the White House, and it's mostly empty. Then soldiers come in, and they tell the journalists, stay the fuck out of our way, which I'm like, yeah, reasonable. And then they get in their way later. It's really annoying. So they're going through the White House. Sorry, we're going through the White House, and we're following the soldiers and our hero, air quote, war journalists who are documenting all this. And then they're Secret Service agents that were just killing them indiscriminately. We get to the press secretary in the press briefing room, and she's like, I'm unarmed. I'm unarmed. All right, don't kill me. Don't kill me. I'm here to negotiate the the
surrender of the president. Yeah.
Yes, you have to promise that you won't kill him. And the Western Forces soldiers are like, we're not like, yeah, we won't kill him. He's like, these are our terms, and like, no terms, just hand him over. And then they shoot her. They just kill her. And I'm like, who
are the good guys?
No one. I think the movie thinks no one.
Yeah, the movie thing. So the movie, Alex Garland clearly thinks that a conflict between Americans is like a conflict between the Soviets and the Nazis. That's why he based it on Come and See. That's why he used that, which is not the same thing. Not even fucking close.
I think you would have to imagine that Alex Garland thinks that the president is worse, but the Western forces aren't exactly great either. That's what you would have to assume, that, they're slightly better, but we don't even know what they want. Is their goal to reestablish the United States, or is their goal to be like, and now we're gonna all be our own separate countries?
Yeah, and now we're just gonna execute everybody in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, and just call it a day. What is the plan after this?
No idea.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Before we keep going, Jen says, it's funny, I just remembered that the American Civil War photographers famously staged photos. They would drag bodies around and move things around the battlefields to make the photos more dramatic. Yes, that is true. Fun fact. Which is really funny and ironic that this movie thinks, no, war journalists are just like neutral, unbiased observers. They don't really have a perspective on things. They just want to report the facts and get good photos. That's all they care about. And I'm like, bullshit.
But somebody's paying their salary.
Yeah, exactly. And they want a story, and Reuters has an agenda here, right? They have to. If there is no completely unbiased news source. There are some that are better than others, right? But but often the bias, even if they're not using really loaded language or actively lying or anything like that, they're choosing what to report on and what not to report on, right?
Yeah.
So Reuters is not like this perfectly objective news source, right? They have a left-wing bent, and they have a perspective. They would have a perspective on the American Civil War. You bet your ass they would. And so they'd be sending war reporters to follow what's happening. Obviously, they want to get an interview with the president because they want to grill him on some of the horrible things he's done. So clearly they're against him, even though they're from a state that is in the loyalist union with this president. But meanwhile, they don't seem to care at all that the Western forces are just killing people who surrender indiscriminately. You know what I mean? They don't.
Yeah, they're executing prisoners of war. And the question of how do you excuse the use of airstrikes against American citizens? It has a lot less potency when you realize that the Western forces of Texas and California are the only ones that are shown to have fighter jets. What else are they using them for, if not airstrikes on American civilians?
Well, Okay, so he says on American citizens.
Sorry,
he
citizens,
say,
whatever. On American citizens.
Well, no, but that changes it, right?
Yeah,
because
it does.
if what he's being grilled for is killing civilians, say in California or Texas, then it's like, oh, that's pretty bad. You probably shouldn't be killing civilians. But if he says what using airstrikes on American citizens,
they're all American citizens.
They're all like, you know what I mean? I don't even know what he's being grilled for.
All the combatants are American citizens, and the other American citizens are using airstrikes against other American citizens. That's the whole thing with the Civil War. So
he's doing a, like, I don't know. It's such a confusing.
It's like a how dare you use airstrikes in a war, basically.
Yeah, or
that's not like, I don't know. I don't even like. Is that what
it's a confused mess. I think the most reasonable interpretation is that despite all the incompetency, what Alex Garland thinks is that Nick Offerman is the president and he's a dictator and he's a bad guy and he's worse than all the other factions, but no one's really good because this is about the horrors of war and how, like, everyone just descends into chaos and turns on each other. So it's there are worse and not as worse factions, but no one's really good. Even our main characters, who don't really care about the overall conflict, they're kind of morally gray too. That's all he's interested in. He's not really interested in, like, showing anyone being good. It's a very cynical thing. That's why I call him the art house Zack Snyder.
The art house Zack Snyder,
because that's what he's like.
Topaz is mentioning also the press secretary drops another faction. Apparently, Alaska is a neutral country. That is true. She says, we want extradition to a neutral site or to a neutral country. We request Greenland or Alaska.
So, well, first of all, in the map, Alaska is just part of. Yeah, it is. In the map officially released by A24, Alaska is one of the loyalist states. So, I don't know what that means.
Another fucking hilarious assumption that Alaska, of all places, would stay loyal to the federal government.
Alaska is just full of libertarians who wanted to escape the lower 48. That's what Alaska is full of.
Alaska is for people running from the cops and libertarians. Serial killers, people running from the cops and libertarians. That's all you're getting.
And people who want to live off the grid and live in nature and stuff like that. They don't give a fuck. Like, they're not gonna stay loyal to the president who's, like, refusing to, like, give up power and all that sort of bullshit.
They don't care.
Anyway, it's really dumb. It's really, really dumb. If anything, they should be part of the California-Texas alliance.
Maybe Texas. Honestly, I don't know California. Like, again, California, Texas makes no fucking sense. Texas and Florida makes more sense.
It does, honestly. Especially in the current climate, makes a lot more sense. So they kill the press secretary, and then I think this might have actually happened before, but there's a part somewhere in there where they're looking for the president. They're going around corners, and they keep doing this dumb thing where they're making really dumb decisions to, like, run out from cover on one side of the hallway, across the doorway to the other side to try and take a picture to make sure they get a good shot of whatever's over there. A lot of these shots don't even result in anything. They're just, like, risking their safety just to try and get the best shot. And I think that's, like, a little absurd how, like, because they're right next to the people shooting who are hiding behind the wall, and they're like, oh, let me run across this opening out into the open where people are shooting at me just to see if I can maybe get a shot of people over there. Like, what? Like, a lot of war photography is the aftermath, not literal. Yeah.
Can you imagine really being a soldier in that scenario where you've got these, like, tag-alongs who are just taking pictures, right? They're just pointing cameras at you and your friends. All you're trying to do is secure a perimeter, right? You're like, okay, I got to make sure that me and my buddies do not get killed here, right?
Yeah.
And you've got these annoying fucking people just sticking cameras in your face that now you're responsible for their safety because they're behind you. And, like, one of them, they're going to, whatever.
I really like the part when he's like, stay the fuck out of our way. I was like, yeah, that's relatable.
Yeah.
Anyway, we eventually get to the president. Now, if you haven't seen the movie and you're following along with all this, I know we've been jumping around, basic gist, obviously, they're trying to get to the president because the end of the Civil War is coming. They want to interview him. They go on this long odyssey through the horrors of war. They eventually arrive here. What they've been hoping to do is interview the president, but now they're just trying to get to talk to him before he's killed. Because obviously they're going to kill him. They've said it quite openly. The Western forces don't plan to take him prisoner. They plan to just kill him. So they're trying to essentially get ahead of the soldiers in order so that they can like talk to him, if at all possible, before he gets killed. Right?
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. Now, I think even knowing all that, there's no way you'll see the finale of this movie coming. I can't wait to get to like the final moments of this movie. I think they're unbelievable. I cannot believe that he made this decision. All right. But right before we get to the finale, there's a part where Kaylee Spaney tries to like get out into the open to take a picture, and then a gunner, like in slow motion, comes from around a corner to shoot at her. And Kirsten Dunst is like, no. And so she runs out and pushes Kaylee Spaney out of harm's way.
And stands there in the middle of the fucking hall. Like, she could have just tackled her. Yes. And both of them are on the ground now. But instead, she runs out and just pushes her down and stands there kind of glowering at her like the fucking Undertaker out of WWE. And then gets shot multiple times in the back by that soldier, and then she falls down.
It's even worse. So she goes to save Kaylee Spaney's life, and instead of tackling through her to push them both to safety, like you said, she just pushes Kaylee Spaney out of the way onto the ground. Not even out of the way, just on the ground. She's still in the open, by the way. She pushes Kaylee Spaney down, and then she stands there. How long does she stand there? She stands there long enough for Kaylee Spaney to hit the ground, realize what happened, pull her camera up, and then take a picture of Kirsten Dunst as she's getting shot. Kirsten Dunst just stands there the whole time that's happening. She doesn't get out of the way. It's like, you know what it's like? It's like when it reminds me of Papa Kent's death in Man of Steel.
Yeah.
where like Superman has all the opportunity in the world to save him and then just doesn't. Kirsten Dunst has all the opportunity in the world to get out of the way and she doesn't. And Kirsten and like Kaylee Spaney just takes a picture of her as she's getting shot. And you're like, oh my God, remember how earlier in the movie she was like, oh, if I get shot, will you take a picture of me? Well, now the tables are turned and now I'm taking a picture of you getting shot. Isn't that something? Isn't that incredible? That's what Alex Garland thinks. He thinks this is a really powerful moment. For one, pushing someone out of the way of a bullet to get shot instead in order to save their life is very cliche. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it is the worst thing in the world when she doesn't even try to get out of the way herself. She pushes her down, not even out of harm's way, just pushes her to the ground and then stands there for like a few seconds. It's really stupid. It's handled horribly, and it makes her whole sacrificial death scene incredibly laughable. Don't let anyone tell you Alex Garland is still a good director, all right? This is a horribly directed scene, and it's the climactic moment of the movie for our main character.
It's meant to be like the catharsis, you know, like, oh, isn't it so tragic? No, it's not tragic. Really stupid. It's really funny because of how stupid it is. Like, just tackle her. Just tackle her. Pull her over to the side. I don't know. Do anything apart from walk out, push her down, and then stand over her like Ali over Joe Frazier, being like, you gonna get up now? Like, are you shitting me?
It's so bad. It's so bad. And then Kaylee Spaney, like, as the soldiers go clear the guy who just shot her or whatever, Kaylee Spaney and Joe are just looking at her like, oh man, this horrified look on their faces, like, oh man, isn't that horrible? It's funny because Kirsten Dunst did nothing to try and like avoid being shot. She just ran into harm's way herself, did a rather bad job of saving Kaylee Spaney's life even, and then just gets shot. And as Topaz points out in the chat, he's mentioned this a couple times, she manages to get like 5 shots of Kirsten Dunst, like in slow motion, essentially, getting shot, even though she has like a manual reload camera. Like there's no way that would happen because she's shooting on film, remember? She can't shoot like so many shots in a second. But oh well, who cares? So... it's horribly cliche. it doesn't really conclude any real meaningful arc for her. Like it's not she's kind of closed off emotionally in the beginning, but I never would have assumed that she wouldn't is here's the thing. I know I said earlier that this movie didn't want to do anything like have her be torn between taking a photo of something and like getting involved, right? And I think that's mostly true. This really isn't that moment. I think Alex Garland thinks this is that moment where it's like, you see, earlier in the movie, she would have just watched her get killed and take a picture of it. But now she tries to save her life. It's like, well, this was like when random bystanders were happening. She was always trying to save the lives of the people she was literally with. That was always something she was trying to do, right?
Yeah.
From the very beginning, she was like, Kaylee Spaney, like, this is dangerous. You need to get Kevlar. You need to get this. You need to get that, the other thing. I don't want to see you doing this work without that sort of protection. She always cared about her from the very beginning. This isn't a meaningful change, right? This isn't growth. This isn't character development. It's just like, at the end, she tried to... And it's not even it shouldn't even be a self-sacrifice because she should have been able to save both of them.
Yeah.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't.
But she was always trying to save them. So this isn't that moment. This isn't the moment I was asking for. I think Alex Garland thinks that's what he did here. But she didn't.
No, she didn't. No, not at all. And real quick, I just want to respond to Eric in the chat who's asserting that Civil War is not a dystopian film. I would say absolutely that it is dystopian. It's speculative fiction.
Are you fucking kidding me? It's absolutely dystopian.
It is a political action thriller, yes, but it is dystopian. Society has collapsed under the regime of a totalitarian government, and now it is a cataclysmic decline of American life and society. It is pretty dystopian.
It is more concerned with the dystopia of what it would be like during the Civil War than it is with the political aspect of the Civil War. It is absolutely a dystopian film.
Yeah.
Not even a question. It's treated more like a zombie apocalypse than an actual political conflict.
I mean, if you know 28 Days Later, you know this movie. Like, you already know what's going to happen, basically. Like, it's very, very similar, minus the hopeful tone at the end of 28 Days Later. But, like...
Yeah. I absolutely disagree. This is a dystopia. He's more concerned with treating it like a dystopian future than he is, like I said, with like, what are the political factions? What do they represent? What do they want? What are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? None of that. Nope, none of that.
No, it's all just about the chaos of the collapse of America. That's basically that's it. And then so after this incredibly awful self-sacrificial scene of Kirsten Dunst just pushing Kaylee Spaney into, a more vulnerable position, arguably.
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
She's prone now. She's knocked the fuck down.
Yeah, harder to hit with a bullet, but yes.
Yeah, well, and either way. So after that, they get in, they break into the Oval Office, they get in there, and the guy, they drag the president out from beneath the desk of the Oval Office, which is where he's been hiding. Place,
dude.
What
a moron.
You sent a distraction, a fake convoy out with possibly your wife in the car, possibly your wife, or just, it doesn't even matter if it's your wife or not. It's somebody who worked for you, who's in the car, meant to draw fire. And your plan was to just hide under the desk and hope they wouldn't notice you weren't in the car? You didn't even try to go the other way? You didn't even try to get out? That's it?
He seems to actually have thought that his press secretary could negotiate, the peaceful capture of him, which is really stupid.
Especially considering that, they all know that if you surrender, you're just going to be fucking executed. So, he didn't even try to get... he didn't even try to do, okay, we're gonna go in two cars, and one's gonna go east, one's gonna go west. Let's go. They don't know which one they have to take a guess, right? He doesn't even do that.
I'm sure there's a tunnel from the White House to a bunker, right?
There has to be.
Am I crazy? There has to be, right? There's tunnels under university
shit like that.
No, but there's tunnels under university campuses in the Northeast so they can get to class in the snow. So there's definitely tunnels underneath the White House to a bunker. All right. So he was hiding awfully. They pull him out. They're right about to kill him. And our guy Joel says, no, 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 don't kill him. I want to talk to him. And so he says, like, can we get a quote? And Nick Offerman says, please don't let them kill me. And Joel, with this like smug, self-satisfied look, says, oh, that'll do. That's perfect. And then they kill him. And that's the end of the movie. Credits cut to credits, and it's a white screen, and then it slowly gets dimmer to reveal a photo. And the photo is a bunch of them smiling to the whole time to talk to him because they want to talk to him before he's killed. They get to him and they said, "Can we get a quote? Please don't let them kill me." Oh, that's perfect. And then they just let him be shot, and he has this sort of self-satisfied look, like, "Ha, that's good and darkly ironic. That'll do."
That's what good, and that makes you look like a coward. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's the end of the movie. That's the sort of resolution of Joel's journey, I guess.
And it's the resolution of Kaylee Spaney's journey because she takes a picture of it happening. That's it.
Yeah. So the conclusion of this movie is they killed the president and the Civil War is over. Now what happens? Who cares? Because what we are really focused on is that Kaylee Spaney went through a hard time. Thanks for watching. Go home. To describe this movie as pointless barely scratches the surface. This is a worthless movie. I hate this movie. It has nothing of value to say. It's incredibly muddled and confused and incoherent and essentially meaningless. I don't know what the point is. I don't know what inspired Alex Garland to even try and tell this story in the first place. Like, what part of this was he passionate about? It's not apparent. This movie sucks, and I hate it.
$50 million.
Oh, yeah, let's fucking talk about that. This is the most expensive A24 movie to date. A24, who I believe their most expensive movie before this was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which they co-financed along with a number of other people, by the way, was $20 million. This movie, I think they financed all by themselves, ? I don't actually know if that's 100% true, but they're a big part of it. They're the main people behind it. $50 million. Oh, sorry, I forgot Beau is Afraid, which was $30 million. Anyway, recently, they've been ramping up the budgets on these movies because they're trying to break into more mainstream fare. Apparently, they decided that they don't want to make cool and interesting, like, indie, low-budget art house, like, alternate horror movies anymore, which was kind of their bread and butter for at least a few years, and, like, do cool niche things that might be successful, like, hyper-successful every once in a while, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like The Witch, like, you know, those sort of movies. Like they don't want to do that anymore. They want to make big budget action spectacle movies, but they want to give them to art house directors that have done nothing but fail for a few years. Here's my problem with A24. I think A24 has built up a reputation as being a studio that celebrates and lifts up filmmakers and lets them do whatever they want. This is a movie that would have benefited from studio meddling. Because any studio worth their salt would be like, no, this is pointless and dumb. Why? Like, I cannot believe that they spent essentially, because there's been a ton of marketing for this movie. I think it's got to be
$100 million.
They spent $100 million on this movie, more than they've ever spent on any movie before. And for this, a sort of like...
A bland,
like, what is this?
A bland milquetoast version.
Boring
fucking movie with nothing
empty,
to say.
Hollow,
vapid, shallow, and like if ever the term shallow and pedantic applied to anything, it is this movie. It is an inch deep and a mile wide. There is nothing happening here that has not been done better in a different war movie. Mm-hmm. And to do this all while inventing a nonsensical civil war in a dystopian America for no other purpose than to gather some kind of, or garner some kind of attention by capitalizing on what like the divided political climate of the
and
moment.
actual fears about a civil war. Let's mention that as well. Yeah,
like actual fear. Tim Pool's actual concerning problem.
Yeah. This movie is getting shockingly good reviews. That baffles me to no end. I'm kind of curious to like watch a few reviews and like see what they even see in it. Because like what I've read from like Rotten Tomatoes blurbs is like just demoralizing how little standards they have. You know, they think I don't know, they think the Texas California alliance is like vague and nonsensical on purpose because it's not really about that, man. It's just about the brutality of war. But everything about the brutality in this movie is nonsensical. It's hyper cynical. There's no point. We don't learn anything. It's not a fun cinematic experience. It's not really super entertaining. It's boring. Our characters don't learn anything. We don't explore any meaningful issues about what it means to be a war photographer, what it means to be in the middle of a modern American Civil War. You know, we haven't had a war on our shores in ages, so like there's no exploration of what that would be like. It's just a dystopia where everything is awful and most people suck. Thanks for watching.
That's it. The other thing about setting it in America too, and setting it in this particular thing, is to try to give it some gravitas when they mortar, monuments in the country. Like it's like to give the American audience like, oh man, you remember that scene where they like kind of like an Independence Day where you see that scene where they blow up the White House. It's like, oh no, they're mortaring the Lincoln Memorial. Man, that's really deep.
Yeah, that's the level of commentary we're talking about here. Did you know that war is horrible?
War's bad.
There should be no war. And oh my god, and like most of the reviews seem to be like, it's not really hyper like specific and political. It's just kind of a generic war bad thing, and that's good. And I'm like, that's insane that you would think that's enough. And then the other small faction of people are like, oh no, this is good because this is shows of like how a civil war could really happen in America. Like if Donald Trump refused to like give up power, and then there was a secession, and then so many people seem to have this belief that like everything would just descend. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of in The Dark Knight, where the villain is like, no, you'll see when the chips are down, everyone will turn on each other. They'll eat each other. And then the movie's about proving him wrong because, there's still good in people, and that like, it wouldn't be all terrible. It would be terrible, but like not everyone, people wouldn't just like turn on each other and be awful that quickly. This movie and so many people who've reviewed it positively seem to think, oh yeah, this is what would happen. And it's like, man, there's something wrong with you guys. Honestly, there's something wrong with you.
It's like if the Joker made us like a civil war. It's like this is what the Joker thinks would happen if the chips were down. Like civilized people.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. This is a worthless movie, and I hate it. Don't believe the reviews. It's not worth watching. It's not even funny bad, except for a few funny scenes. There's a few funny scenes. For example, when Wagner Moura is like screaming into the void because he's just real upset because he can't get to interview the president now, and we don't hear any sound, and he's just really hamming it up. And
he's like shaking.
Yeah. The movie thinks it's really horrible and harrowing, but it's very funny. There are not.
It's funny.
There's only a couple moments I think that are there's like a moment or two that are intentionally funny that work, and there's only a moment or two that are unintentionally funny and that make it worthwhile. It's mostly really boring.
Yeah.
It's political. It's not even interesting enough to like generate a lot of controversy. The idea of the movie is more controversial than the movie itself, which I said it at the beginning, but I'm going to circle back to it now. I cannot believe that it's possible to make a movie like this with this premise in current year America, and it's so bad and bland and boring and nonsensical that it doesn't even this won't even be controversial. Like it's gonna disappear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this would be a movie that like you would expect people to be like, oh, I can't believe they're inciting all the, you know what I mean? Like this would be a focal point of the culture war if it wasn't so terrible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If it was, yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, it's insane that you took this subject matter, which is like, it's kind of like you had a chance to sort of make something where people might have actually been like, oh shit, like, yeah, wow, that's pretty interesting. We've all been talking, like, there's been a lot of people like the Tim Pools of the world, like my uncle who lives in London, who all think that like a second civil war is just around the corner, right?
Any second now.
Any second now, people are gonna start eating each other. Everybody's gonna treat each other like animals and just slaughter each other in the streets. Like, uh, it, uh,
it's worrisome.
It's worrisome that people like this, that people enjoy this.
I agree. It makes me uncomfortable that people like this movie. It does, just to be perfectly honest. Cecil Lawrenson said, nothing civil about war, LOL, LMAO, Rotten Tomatoes, 5 out of 5. Like, that's kind of, yeah. That's
like, kind of, man.
Yeah. It isn't war. Okay, I said this earlier. I didn't really comment on it. I just kind of presented it without comment. That the moral center of this movie is like, man, don't do war. I thought I was telling, when I was reporting on wars, I thought I was telling everybody, hey, don't do war.
Hey, you see this picture I took of people putting a guy in a tire and then covering him in kerosene and lighting him on fire? I thought I was sending a warning not to do that to each other. Okay, like, you know, not everybody would do that to each other if they had, like, no, most people wouldn't
actually. And second of all, the idea that, like, oh, war is pointless and bad, that is a stupid idea. All right? There are situations where war is necessary. Obviously, you idiot. Like, it's not, like, it's a necessary evil a lot of the times, but it is necessary. This whole, like, I don't know how so many people, like, reach adulthood and think, like, oh, man, like, this just shouldn't be any wars ever and pacifism is good. It's like, are you a moron? Do you think that, like, that's an actual reasonable way of, like, operating in the world, that any country can just, like, never go to war ever because war is terrible and we shouldn't do war? Like, there are all sorts of reasons that it might become necessary. Happens all the time. You know, you've ever heard, it's like don't kill people ever. And it's like, okay, yeah, what about self-defense if they're trying to kill me? Like, it's that level of commentary. It's unbelievable that you can make a movie like this and be like, man, if there was a war, everything would descend into total anarchy and everyone would be horrible to everyone and it would just be brutal and terrible, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's so true. It's like, no,
that's so true. Everybody is just awful to each other all the time.
Yeah, and I don't like it. I'm not going to say this movie's like, oh, it's irresponsible or it's inciting anything. It's just
no,
like,
it's not. It's not. It's not taking enough of a stance against anything to be irresponsible. It's not defining the factions well enough. It basically boils down to, like, it's not defining who's fighting over what well enough to be able to understand or to be able to be called irresponsible. Topaz is saying Garland's quote about California and Texas, two states with different political ideologies, putting that aside to defend the Constitution and beat fascism. It's just them. It's like,
why is it just them?
Why is it just them then? Like, why just Texas and California? Where are the rest of them? Like, there aren't any constitutionalists in fucking Missouri enough that Missouri can just pretend like none of it has happened. Obviously, that's Alex Garland's words, not Topaz's words. So, you know.
I know, but they're also not just putting their differences aside. They've become one country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. So I want to respond to a couple super chats. Dr. Diddler, thank you so much. The movie convinced me that war must be good. Correct.
Yes.
No, it's such a dumb, like, he wants really hard for this to be an anti-war movie, but you have to actually understand war to make an anti-war movie. You know, you have to understand the logistics of it. You have to understand why people do it. You have to understand the effect it has on people. You have to understand what it does to a country economically, all that stuff. To be anti-war, you need to understand war. He doesn't. He does not understand why war happens, what it does, how it works, how it would happen in America. You know,
Yeah.
where like, that it's in America matters. That like it seems to be like one of the most brutal and debilitating wars in recent memory in terms of like destabilizing the countries involved. And like America of all places is where this is like the most like you know
Wait
what I
a
mean?
minute.
Like I don't
Oh my God! Wait, yes, Soli's way in the chat says this thing about the line where he like because one of the questions that they're planning on asking him is, "Do you regret disbanding the FBI?" Why would a totalitarian dictator disband his arm of political control, his arm of law enforcement?
I have no idea. It makes no sense.
What the oh my fucking God! What did he just fold it into the CIA and give them authority to work on American shore? Is that like
Well, you don't get to do the thing that people think Donald Trump would do because so much of the like, sort of like deep state apparatus is like populated by people who don't like Donald Trump, right? And so like there's a sort of like, conflict between the people who work at the FBI and the CIA and Donald Trump and stuff like that. So you don't get to do the whole like, oh, Trump is going to disband the FBI because the FBI like stands against him. And then also do, oh, every state on the East Coast, even the most blue states in the country, are still going to stay loyal to him.
And Florida is
that.
not. And Florida and Texas are not. Yeah, exactly.
And California is not.
California is not.
Yeah.
New York and California have more in common than California and Texas. It is like
the people who don't like California enough that they're leaving are going to Texas because it's not California.
And they're going to Idaho and Wyoming and everything, and they're ruining those states.
Yeah. The FBI line is literally the FBI line is literally there to sort of echo something of Trump, but it makes no sense in this context at all because he is a bad writer. He's a bad writer. It's kind of funny to me that like he's going to give up directing now. This is his last movie he's going to direct. He's going to go back to just focusing on writing. And it's like, oh, well, the writing has been the worst part of everything you've made in the past 10 years. So
not confident about that.
No. I mean, maybe if you give your material to someone else, they could change a lot of it and make it better for you. Like maybe that's what happened in 28 Days Later. I don't know. It's a speculation.
Is that really what he's doing? That he said this is his last movie that he's directing?
Oh yeah, he said he's retired. He's giving up directing. There's a quote. There's a quote from a couple of years ago where he said something about how he doesn't actually just enjoy directing all that much. And so now he's like, you know what? I'm just gonna go back to being a writer. It's like, okay, that's fine because I haven't enjoyed anything you've directed other than Ex Machina. So good riddance. But the writing has been the worst part of everything since Ex Machina.
Yeah.
So like
it's not really a confidence booster, but at least I won't have to see your name pop up as like director anymore.
Yeah. Donald's angry in the chat. Thank you for the super chat. Says, what's fun when the government shuts down and society keeps on moving. This movie sounds very fart huffy. Also enjoyed episodes 4 Hugs and Kisses. It's a little fart huffy, I would say. This movie can't make up its mind about whether society has completely collapsed or whether it's still going on like nothing happened. It tries to do both, and I can't believe it, but it's trying to do both. There are people on farms in Missouri and Colorado who are just living their lives. There's a small town
outside of
Pennsylvania,
Pittsburgh, yeah,
where everything seems
like nothing's going wrong.
Everything seems to be going fine. Meanwhile, there's people like they're driving through cities that are completely empty. The dollar has collapsed entirely. There's lawlessness. There's no police anywhere
except in New York, where they're trying to stop people from getting clean water, and then they're beating them and getting blown up by suicide bombers.
Yeah, the movie really tries to have its cake and eat it too in every respect, and so it's a mess. I think it is a little bit. This was mentioned a while ago. I think it is something of a Rorschach test in a similar vein as Barbie, in that it's so muddled and confused and contradictory and vague often that you can project whatever you want onto it. So if you're willing to just see the things that make you go, oh, that makes me think of a thought that I already have, and ignore everything that contradicts it, you can be like, no, this is a good movie. It's not a good movie. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen. There are things in it that are passable, but they're few and far between. Hugh, how would you say the movie ranks compared to, let's just focus on his directorial output. Ex Machina is number one. That's obvious.
By far, yeah.
For me, Annihilation, surprisingly, is number two. As flawed as I think the movie is, everything else has been worse. Where would you say Civil War fits?
Well, it's above Men. I think Men is still the worst just because of how fucking Men is also a nothing of a movie, but it's also just like the most. It's the one that relies most on just being a metaphor and not having so Men is still the worst for me. This is very close behind it, but it's it's just above Men.
You think this and Men are worse than Devs?
Oh fuck, do I think this is okay, no, Devs is fucking God, Devs is like 8 hours long. And I've seen a lot of No, Devs is worse. Devs is the worst. And that's mostly just because of the length and the dryness and how fucking stupid, wall to wall stupid. Yeah, no, Devs is by far the worst.
I think Devs is the worst as well. I think one of the reasons I would say that is because there are a lot of problems with, let's say Men in Civil War, but Devs seems to not understand cause and effect and basic fundamental aspects of reality in a way that few things have failed so hard that I've ever seen. It kind of breaks logic itself. It doesn't understand human beings. It doesn't understand quantum mechanics. And Devs seems to be the one that thinks it's the most intelligent. If you can imagine that the show thinks it's doing something really smart and clever, I get that vibe more from Devs is the most pretentious. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Men is the one that's most all metaphor and theme and no literal logic that makes any coherent sense of the group. Men is also the one that's the most annoying in terms of the values that it puts forth. I think Men is a sexist movie. So I'm not a fan of that. I think it's actually kind of a little morally repulsive in some ways. It's vague enough that not everyone would get. I think that it's vague enough that it's hard to discern exactly what the theme even is, other than men. You know what I mean? What about men? By implication, men thinks that men are just worse than women and are the cause of all their suffering, and that we're not deserving of women's love because we're terrible to them. That's the sort of message of Men, and it's sexist and horrible and gross, and I don't like it. Devs is worse because it breaks logic and cause and effect and all that stuff.
It just breaks reality. And then this is right above Men because it has no message. It's just
it's empty and hollow, and it didn't infuriate me the same way Men and Devs did. This is kind of an empty, pointless, worthless film. And so I would go, if I had to, I'd say Ex Machina, Annihilation, Civil War, Men, Devs. That's my ranking, and I'm sticking to it.
I'm going to agree with that one. I think I'm on board with that ranking. This movie did infuriate me, but mostly that's because I really don't like crappy world building. It really sticks. Bad world building really makes me upset. And it starts to piss me off, especially when you get Alex Garland's particular brand of pretentious mixed in with that. Because he thinks that this is this clever and really smart and that he handled this well.
He must, because otherwise, I don't understand what he was even interested in doing here. I mean, he thinks this is an allegory that is a warning to us about our future if we don't, turn it around. He thinks this is the thing. He thinks he simultaneously has disregarded actual political divisions in the country in terms of their geography, for example, by uniting California and Texas. He's ignored that on purpose to separate it from real life. But meanwhile, he still thinks he has something to say about our current political divisions and our current political environment. It's kind of the worst of both worlds. Yeah. He definitely thinks he said something important here, that war is bad and that we should avoid doing this. And it's okay, sure, thanks, man.
Stop doing war. We taught this lion to eat tofu.
Man.
Oh,
yeah, Donald's angry. It's insane. It is insane that he said this is a companion piece to men.
how would that? Okay, how?
Cynical, deeply, deeply cynical. That's what they have in common.
That's
Otherwise, they
it,
have
though. There's
nothing to do. They
nothing.
have nothing. Yeah, this movie isn't surreal. This movie isn't really metaphorical. This movie isn't really concerned with men being worse or better than women. It has nothing to do with sort of gender relations. It has nothing to do with men in any way except for that it's deeply cynical. That's all I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, Ex Machina is a little cynical, but not to the extent of his later projects.
Yeah.
He really, I could imagine that's a big part of why his stories are suffering, is that he's really cynical about people. From what I understand of, let's say, 28 Days Later, it has kind of a more hopeful air to it, despite all the calamities around them. That's sort of how you described it. Is that true?
Sorry. Yeah. 28 Days Later is 28. Okay, so 28 Days Later is like it's cynical as well, but like it's cynical at some points, but the main characters are not, right? Like the main characters are good people who are being affected by this horrible situation, but the end is hopeful because they like it's you know, if you haven't seen it, but it's like I'm just gonna spoil it for you. Like, yeah.
No. I wanted don't spoil it, please.
Okay,
All I wanted to get at is that, like, based on what you described to it about it, that it's not nearly as cynical.
No,
That there's like an element of hope in there.
there is an element of hope. There's a big element of hope, and it's like the ending point of the movie, and it follows. It logically follows. When you get to the ending, you're gonna be shocked, especially now after seeing all of his other stuff. You're gonna be shocked how logical of a zombie movie it gets to be by the end.
Yeah, interesting. I'm excited to watch it, and I'm excited to watch Dread. I've heard nothing but good things about both of those, and just to remind myself that he used to do interesting things. We have theories about what happened to him. We don't have any facts really, but something happened, and he's not what he used to be, and I don't know if he ever will be again, and it's a shame. But he's definitely not going to turn it around if everyone keeps praising each new piece of crap that he drops.
Well, he's not going to turn it around because he's done directing. He's like, well, you know what?
He'll keep writing, but he's not. His writing quality is not going to improve. Partly because people praised Annihilation. People were remember the reason we made the video on Annihilation in the first place is because we were sick of people lamenting that no one went to see it because it was actually really good. And it's like, no, it was a mess,
terrible, and it deserved.
And it flopped for a reason.
That was the title, right? Annihilation deserved.
Yeah,
to flop.
It did deserve to flop. I stand by that. But like people said that was good. Oh, and it's a shame that no one saw it. And some people said the devs was good. Most people didn't watch it, right? Because this is devs came out in the sort of heyday of like every streaming company was just throwing money at everything, and so it's like an FX Hulu movie about boring sci-fi stuff. Most people didn't see it, right? But a lot of people that did see it swear it's good. Civil War is getting very good reviews. Men was kind of middling. I think there's something very alienating about like the sort of like male pregnancy horror at the end of that movie, for example. I am concerned with how well reviewed this is. I disagree very strongly, and I don't think there's anything that will push him into writing good things again. You know what I mean?
No, I can't imagine that it's going to turn around. Like,
just one last thought maybe about Civil War is what happens after the end of this movie?
it's so difficult.
What happens to you?
It's so difficult to like. Somebody in the chat is mentioning. There's no way to do it. Somebody in the chat is mentioning like a huge question is how are the Californians and Texans all the way in DC? Yeah. It's a 2,600-mile supply line, and the big defeat that they're talking about at the beginning of the movie is a supply line disruption. Those troops should be isolated and should be sitting ducks. Like, they should be fucked. They do not have supplies, and it's going to take a while to get that supply chain back. So they are screwed until that gets fixed. But apparently, no, actually, that was just a lie. DC is going to fall. It's going to fall soon, and we need to make it there before it does. That's the story. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no question of real logistics in this at all. So it's impossible to predict what's going to happen after Texas and California independently deposed the president, killed him, and what are they going to do to all the loyalist states? How loyal are the loyalist states? How loyal are, like, what is it going to do to the Maoists on the northern border? Are Texas, like, you would think that the Maoists on the northern border would be a more pressing issue than, you know, the loyalist government all the way on the other side of the country, that you don't really have to worry about because they're not directly impacted. Well, except that Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico are loyalists. So, like,
apparently,
what the fuck?
Here's the question. So if the federal government under the control of this dictator guy says, no, you can't, this is an illegal secessionist movement, you can't leave, we're going to fight to keep this union, you're not allowed to form your own country. Why do California and Texas need to march like they're actually in the old Civil War all the way across the country just to get to DC? Like, they have all the equipment. They could just, like, try and fly to DC. You know what I mean? Like, why do we have to go conquer
why do they need
our way across the country? I have no idea.
Why, like, that's a great question about any of this, is, like, why does either faction need infantry? We've already had, I know this is kind of a cliched thing, but, like, we've already had this problem with a bunch of other war movies where it's like the boots on the ground are no longer as important, because if you can, like, if technology keeps advancing the way that it has been, we won't need that in, you know, 15, 20 years. Like, and that's a long prediction. Like, I'm giving it a big window there. It could even be shorter. We won't need boots on the ground. We'll have drones and robots and shit like that can do that all for us. Why does DC need infantry? Why does it need generals? Why can't it just have people, like, fucking flying drones and blowing up Sacramento? Why?
I mean, it needs generals, but yeah, like, the infantry is a good question. Like, why are they, like, marching their way with tanks across the country? For example, you would think that maybe all California and Texas really need to do here is kill the president.
Yeah.
You know? Like, they need to depose him. And it's like, well, you can depose a leader without conquering your way across one of the biggest countries in the world, in order to go get him. You know what I mean? It's just.
And why are they the only two? Like, why Texas Florida, and California?
I assume that there's a civil war fighting against the Florida Alliance as well. We just never see them because a president man says that, like, oh, thankfully South Carolina and North Carolina have decided not to join the Florida Alliance. I assume if they're fighting against one secessionist faction, that they're probably fighting against the other secessionist factions too, to try and maintain their control over them. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. I don't see any reason why they'd only be fighting Texas and California. So clearly they're also probably fighting down in the South too, but that's just never mentioned at all by any of our characters, even though they're journalists and would know a lot of this information.
And it also creates a huge, because, like, that makes the supply line even more vital, because Oklahoma is part of the Florida Alliance, and that's Texas's direct route.
Yeah, but, I don't know.
All those states to the right of Texas, they are the direct route to DC. They can't just cut across Oklahoma without causing another, like, opening a second front on the war.
Yeah.
And, like,
so here's there's so many questions. Here's another question. So when this dictatorial president kind of takes over and starts being evil and terrible, a number of groups secede, but they don't all stay together. Why not? Why don't Florida and all the other states in the South, along with Texas, along with California, along with everywhere in the Northwest, why doesn't everyone who leaves stay together? Who knows? Doesn't make any sense. Like, you'd think they would. If the problem is the main guy in charge who's being evil now, and that's what forces them to secede, which we don't even know that that's true, but we're assuming it, why don't they all stick together? Who knows? The other question is, when the movie's done, they've killed the president of the loyalist states. The loyalist states seem like they're in such disarray that they're ready to give up and do whatever. Do California and Texas want to form the United States again? What do they plan to do with the Florida alliance? Are they going to be like, oh, we're going to stay separate? And like, it's the thing I thought for the first watch, or not, I only watched it once, but when I was first watching it, I was like, okay, what's the movie's state on whether what's their stance rather on whether the United States should come back together again or not? And they killed the guy who was fighting to keep everything together, and there's no mention of what they want to do after. So you could be forgiven for thinking that the stance of the movie is that we should just let the United States break apart. You know?
Yeah. You could be forgiven for, because and also like, if DC is so close to collapse, right, and everybody can kind of tell that, you know, why not show that by having other states, you know, secede, right? Like if South Carolina's government is concerned for the welfare of its people and they see that DC can't protect them anymore, of course they're going to switch to being part of Florida, or, you know, joining whatever else. There's also a funny part in a funny chat there that says the movie poster shows a fortified Statue of Liberty, but the front never reaches New York, which is, you know, it's kind of funny. The only thing that happens in New York is New Yorkers killing other New Yorkers, which is just par for the course. So,
well, and then the other thing, of course, obviously the front never reaches New York, but also, probably worth noting that this is another example of him wanting to use imagery, whether or not it makes sense. Why the fuck would there be snipers in the Statue of Liberty? It's like, I don't know if you could imagine a worse position to try and stake out. You know, it's surrounded by water, guys. Anyway, it's really dumb.
And you know, where's Canada in all this? The international community, Canada's doing just fine. Their dollar is worth insane amounts of money. Like ours has collapsed. They're rolling in it. You know, the Leafs have finally won a Stanley Cup because there's no more. There's no more American teams to, you know, to win.
They're doing just fine.
Canada's fat and happy up there in the Great White North.
I don't know that they're necessarily doing better than they were before. Because the implication of like, oh, what about $300 Canadian instead of US dollars? And he's like, oh yeah, hell yeah. Because $300 normally for, you know, filling up the tank of gas is a lot. So I don't know if the implication is that Canada is like worth way more now. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, because I'm sure a lot of people would flee to Canada actually.
All of the best Americans go to Canada at this point. That's why we have all these characters to follow.
There's nothing indicating that actually might be interesting if an American Civil War broke out, whether people would try to flee to Canada or not. You know, a lot of people would probably try to go to Mexico. But anyway, that's never mentioned. The international community does not factor into it even once, not even in a lame sort of by the numbers news broadcast. We don't even do that. You know, which, you know, those can be kind of lame and cringe, but if it would tell us more about this world, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, I like anything that gives us more, that illuminates more of what's actually happening. Like, there's just not enough to know. You know, there's not like, and what, you know, that you were saying earlier, would they, you know, are they gonna, you know, go after the Florida alliance now that they've deposed the president? I would think that the Maoists on in the Pacific Northwest are way more dangerous. But then again, I don't know what the Florida alliance is about. I don't know if that's just like a secondary United States where they're all, you know, representative government. Like, who knows? He didn't think. Who knows? Why am I thinking about it? Alex Garland didn't. So why should I care? He clearly doesn't care. Yeah. Why do I? Like, it's so shallow, dude. It's such a shallow, terrible set of world building. It's awful. Like, what do they do? Are they just gonna like topple the monuments? They're just gonna pull the Washington Monument down like the statue of Saddam? Is that what's gonna happen? Who knows? Who fucking knows? They execute prisoners of war. They're executing prisoners of war who probably, like, the only way that you could believe that this is happening, right, is that the Texan soldiers are killing people who are, until, you know, recently, until this all broke out, were part of the same military apparatus that they were. but they're just executing these. They might have been in basic with some of these people, but they just execute them when they surrender anyway, and then mutilate their corpses for no. Well, we don't even know who those people were who were doing that. Never mind.
They were militia. I wanted to a small point. I wanted to mention this earlier, but they make a big deal when Jesse Plemons' guys are dumping bodies in a hole. They're like, "Are they military or are they civilians?" They're like, "They're civilians. They're not wearing uniforms." And it's like, well, the militia weren't wearing uniforms either. So really, that doesn't answer the question. But Alex Garland didn't think about that very hard. So yeah, the militia. There's that one roving band of militia who are fighting.
For what? Who knows? Why are they there? Who knows? They're just killing soldiers for some reason. Who knows? What soldiers were they? Were they Western forces or federal? Who knows?
Why did they mutilate their bodies with a gun? Like they were really enjoying it? Who knows?
Yeah, but like literally just a couple scenes before we were supposed to like it's like there's one guy who's pinned down behind a pillar, and he's trying to get away, but they can't cover him. They can't cover him well enough. So he gets shot, and then they, capture all of them and then kill them, execute them, and mutilate their corpses. But who were they fighting for? Why were they fighting? What is the building? What's the significance of it? Who knows? Who knows? Doesn't matter. Just no thoughts, just vibes.
How dumb the Florida Alliance is as his name. Yeah, if you've ever been to any of the states in the South, you would know that they would not go along with being called part of Florida, right? I'm in Georgia right now, and if you told people in Georgia like, oh, our new country is going to be called the Florida Alliance, they'll be like, no, I don't
like
think
hell
so.
It is.
Like hell it is, yeah. It's a dumb name, it, yeah. So. Quick summarization. God, I can't speak. Of the four main sort of categories of writing, right? World building, some of the worst I've ever seen. Yeah. For a movie that takes place
rivals ostensibly the creator in terms of bad world building. It might even be worse.
It's what makes it worse for me is because ostensibly this is just our world in the near future. Whereas the creator is sort of the same sort of way. Yeah. Anyway, no, you're right. It's bad. It's some of the worst world building I've seen in a long time. In terms of plot, it's horribly contrived based on a lot of stupid decisions, and you're not really invested in anything they're doing. So it's not especially compelling. But the plot is not the worst part of the movie. It's not like it's full of like plot holes necessarily. It's a lot of stupid.
It's too simple to be full of plot holes. It's literally just president about to die. Need to photograph. Like we've got to make it there before he die.
It's very convenient that they don't die a number of times. That's about the worst it gets. In terms of characters, maybe the best part of the movie, but still not good. Very basic. You've seen better stuff in other movies. Sometimes the character moments seem better than the dialogue actually is because the actors are doing their best. It's very thin. The best sort of character stuff we get is that like, oh, there's this young girl who is like a lot like I was when I was a kid, and she wants to do what I'm doing, but I'm kind of cynical and jaded, so I'm trying to like help her out, and eventually I save her life. It's like, okay, that's something, but we get basically nothing of how they feel about the conflict, and by implication, based on what they want and how they react to the events around them, they don't seem like they're very good people. Themes.
They're also really stupid, and they don't seem to value their own lives at all.
Yeah, they're pretty stupid. And then themes. Themes is incredibly weak. It's lame stuff like, don't do war. And, if a war happened, everyone would turn on each other and everything would be terrible. And it's like, war is bad. Yeah, war is rough, man. I already knew that, and I've seen it done way better in so many other movies. And the whole, like, don't do war thing, it's like, okay, but what about when it's necessary? Yeah. It's a worthless movie, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
They might as well have just piled $50 million up in the parking lot and burned it.
Yeah, speaking of that, the full weekend numbers have not arrived. Actually, no, they have. Oh, they hadn't when we started the stream, but now they're in. The movie made $25,000. Not thousand, sorry. The movie made $25 million opening weekend.
Is that
it needs to make well, if you include, it needs to make, hold on. Okay, at least $100 million to cover the production and marketing, maybe even more because there's a lot of marketing, but let's assume $100 million. And they get something like 50% of the ticket sales. If unless I'm doing the math wrong, it needs to make $200 million.
Just to break even, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Right? Yeah. Because I think the number can vary in terms of how much the theaters take, but you often hear something like 50%. Sometimes you hear that the theaters get 40%, so that number would go down. But safe estimate, this movie needs to make $200 million to break even. Did this movie need to cost $50 million?
I cannot fathom a good reason.
Well, because a lot of the action is just really lame. Clearly, they spent a lot of money on it. I don't doubt that, in a lot of these sets and locations with all these cars and stuff. And, there's a decent amount of CGI. So I can't imagine, it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't worth it.
No. Do you think they set actual fires in that one scene where they drive through a burning forest for some reason and everybody looks out the windows and, ooh, isn't it so pretty?
I didn't talk about that scene because it's so meaningless, but that's an example of a scene where, despite his claims that some movies are too stylish and romantic to be effective anti-war movies, he has a scene that purely exists for the visual, the sort of stylish romantic visual of them driving through a forest at night that's being set on fire. And so, no, they definitely didn't light any fires for that. That's just all, they're on a set. But yeah, no, it's wasted money. I don't think they'll make their money back. I'd be shocked if they did.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see how the word of mouth goes on this one, because it's getting a lot of praise from critics, but is it getting a lot of praise from people who've actually seen it and aren't paid to talk about it? All
right, so currently IMDb has it a 7.7, far too high. Rotten Tomatoes, if you click on it, because I hate Rotten Tomatoes. A friendly reminder for anyone who maybe has forgotten or who's never actually heard this, the Rotten Tomatoes score is really dumb. And the way it works is that it's just the percentage of people that gave it a score higher than I think a 6 out of 10. So if everyone gave the movie a 6 out of 10, it would have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. If everyone gave it a 5 out of 10, it would have a 0, right? It's really stupid. But if you click on the actual score, it'll tell you the actual number out of 10. And the actual number out of 10 is 7.6 out of 10. So on IMDb,
it lines up with IMDb's.
Yes, on the audience side, currently all audience, because they separate verified audience from all audience. They're both comparable. They're both 3.9 and 3.7 out of 5. So they're all in the 7 out of 10 range. Far too high. We'll see if that changes as more people see it. But I don't know what people are getting out of this movie. I really don't.
I have no idea. I have no clue. Well, that concludes my thoughts on this movie. I'm ready to abandon it and go watch Fallout.
And never talk about it ever again. Well, have okay,
goodbye,
so
Alex Garland. It's good fucking riddance. I hope you never direct anything else ever again. Stick to your word, please. I don't want to do any more of your movies.
Please keep your promise. Yeah, that's the gist of Civil War. There's always the possibility that maybe you'll disagree with us, because certainly a lot of people seem to disagree with us, but I don't think this movie is worth your time, even a little bit. I think if you think critically about the movie, it falls apart, and it's a waste of time. It has nothing really redeeming about it. And I think it's going to disappear. It's not going to stand the test of time. It's going to disappear from the public consciousness within a couple months, if not sooner. Don't bother. That's the gist. Thank you all.
For reference as well, the audience score for this movie on Rotten Tomatoes 77. The audience score for the creator is 76. So they are comparable.
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, you know what? They have a lot in common. Actually.
Yeah, they do.
Yes, not a good movie. Severely overrated by the looks of it. What a shame. It's not even fun controversial. That's a big disappointment. I didn't expect it to be good, but I thought at least it'd be spicy. Releasing a movie about a future American Civil War in an election year in the current state of things. I thought at least we'd get some fun, like, oh, fuck, that was bold, even if I hate it,
Yeah.
Like, at least it might be exciting, but it's not.
It's not. It has nothing of value to offer. You would get more out of watching. You would get more out of rewatching like Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, I mean, like that almost goes without saying. Yeah, there's a lot of things you get more value of.
Rewatch Apocalypse Now. It's longer and it's still kind of depending on how you feel about that movie. But rewatch that, you'll get pretty much exactly what you're getting out of this, but better.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I want to see Come and See at some point too.
Yeah, watch Come and See if you haven't seen Come and See, and if you tell me what you think, because I the last time I watched it, I enjoyed it. So, well, as much as you can with something like that. But
yeah,
God, I rewatched All Quiet on the Western Front. I mean, like, Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that'll about do it for our coverage of Civil War. I don't intend to talk about this movie ever again if I can help it. Thank you for listening to us rant about this mess of a film. Hopefully it wasn't too scatterbrained to follow for the people who haven't seen it. We appreciate you all hanging out in the chat and for the super chats. Thank you very much. I'm pretty sure I responded to all of them, so I think we're good in that department. Thanks again for hanging out with us. We certainly appreciate it. It's been fun chatting with you about the movie. A lot of good points made in the chat today. You love to see it. Next week, the current plan is to talk about the new Fallout show, which is proving to be quite controversial. I've seen it already, but Hugh hasn't, so I won't give my general thoughts on it yet. You'll have to wait till next week. But I'm forcing Hugh to watch it. So
I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it all this week.
It'd be interesting. Join us next time. We'll see you around the bend. Oh, and last update about Devs 4 for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning of the stream. Devs 4 is done. It is complete. All that remains is for Disney to release its copyright hold on it, and then it will be available for you to watch and enjoy. We worked hard on it. I know it's a very long wait for it. We hope it is worth the wait. I think there's a lot of fun stuff, and we think you'll enjoy it. So that should be out absolutely no later than next Friday. That's how long Disney has to respond to the appeal. So hopefully sooner, but no later than this coming Friday. Thanks again for hanging out with us. It's been fun.
5 soon.
No, don't say that. We do continue to work on it, and it will happen. And God willing, it will not take nearly as long as it took between 3 and 4. But don't say soon. Don't hold me to that. There are a couple shorter videos I might want to make about different subjects in the meantime. So we'll see you next time. Toodaloo, friendos. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye. Don't do a civil war.
Nothing civil about war, guys.
Don't do it. Don't do it. I know you're thinking about it. Don't do it.
Don't you do
it.
It's
bad.
Do it.
This is a warning. No, don't do it. Don't listen to him. Stay strong.